This is Atomic Shinobi, and today I'm going to narrate second part of What If Kid Naruto was trained by Guardian of the World. If you enjoyed this video, please like, share, and subscribe to this channel. Now wasting no more time, let's start the story.
She nodded in response to his inquiry. "You're the commander, I assume." "Yes, I am the commander of the Night Watch. My name is Althea Ebenlock. It is my job to protect the town of Darkshire from the many threats of Duskwood." She nodded knowingly, saying, "It must be a difficult job based on what I witnessed last night." "Yes, it is not an easy task, but someone must do it. In any case, one of your people mentioned that you were interested in seeing me." "Yes, in fact, right now I want to offer you a job." "A job?" Naruto said the word again. "Well, not a job per se, but I'll give you a task to be done. I will pay you for your time though, so don't think I'll take advantage of you like that." Naruto considered the job's potential as well as its advantages and disadvantages. It would provide me with an opportunity to help these people, and I might even gain some mission experience, sort of. "What is the position?" When she heard him accept, her smile widened. "That's the essence." Abruptly, she produced a small map of what he assumed to be Duskwood. She indicated a small town on the right side of the paper and said, "Okay, we are here." She indicated what appeared to be a cave and said, "South of here, near a mine, is a camp of Worgen that has caused us a lot of trouble. Although it seems straightforward, I want you to go to this camp and thin their numbers a bit." Was still unclear. "What is a Worgen?" She answered without being at all bothered by the question. "The Worgen are essentially a cross between a human and a wolf. They typically live in packs and are swift and nimble." She gave him the map and left to, he assumed, patrol the town. "Do not let them bite you, they have a very nasty infection." Naruto headed south along the road, passing a cemetery before veering off the path in the direction of what he thought was the mine. As he was walking through the forest, he noticed a dark taint that made him uneasy. He couldn't tell what it was, but it made him uneasy. Naruto climbed a tree to look over a large embankment and finally saw what a Worgen looked like. The hunched over, roughly humanoid creature had a body covered in coarse, grayish, black fur, snarling teeth, and twitching claws that seemed ready to tear apart anything in its path. It looked like a cross between a wolf and a human. However, his observation was interrupted when he felt something flying at him at unbelievable speeds. He immediately leapt to the ground and looked up to see that the branch he was standing on had been chopped off the tree's base. A Worgen was glaring down at him from the small stump that was left, and Naruto quickly whipped out two kunai and assumed a fighting stance, waiting for the thing to attack. The Worgen shot down from the stump and slashed at Naruto with great speed and fury. Naruto sidestepped and slashed his kunai against the creature's stomach, causing a deep wound that gushed blood and ichor. The Worgen snarled, seemingly unaffected by the wound, and it was then that Naruto realized what was happening to the creature. The wound was slowly but surely closing itself up until only a scar remained. The creature continued to attack, and Naruto would dodge and counterattack, saying, "Crap, it looks like this thing can heal fast too." With little time to think, the creature lunged again, only to be sliced again. Dodging another wild strike, Naruto moved inside its guard and started hacking away at the creature, saying, "This is not working for me, so I'd better try going on the offensive." The creature was taken by surprise and pushed back as Naruto kept hacking and slashing at it, causing wounds to appear more quickly than they could heal, until finally Naruto had had enough of the creature. The Worgen managed to give one final howl before Naruto's kunai lodged in its chin and through its brain, cutting it off. However, Naruto heard dozens of howls coming from the opposite side of the hill before he could calm down. "Well shit," was an understatement because Worgen was on the hill trying to tear him to pieces as soon as he finished thinking that. Naruto quickly flooded the area with clones in an effort to level the playing field, and soon a minor battle was taking place. The place was a blur of chaos as Naruto's clones were hacking, slashing, casting spells, setting off explosive tags, and Rasenganing. Despite Naruto's remarkable success, clones kept dying because the creatures had an instinctive ability to work better in groups than alone. One would attract the clone's attention, while another would attack from the sides that the clone couldn't defend against. The original Naruto himself wasn't unfazed either, sporting multiple claw slashes across his arms and torso, and his clothing looked like Swiss cheese. The chakra explosion that occurred when a Rasengan was pushed into one of the Worgen's stomach left no identifiable fragments behind it, and the force of the attack also sent another one flying back. He started to attack another one, but a large Worgen suddenly tackled him to the ground. Naruto tried to move his hands, but the physically stronger Worgen pushed them to the ground. The beast looked up at him and simply laughed at his predicament, taunting him by slowly lowering its head in preparation for the bite that would end it. Naruto struggled to move his legs, but the weight of the creature rendered them useless. Refusing to give up, He closed his eyes and pushed even harder with his hands in an attempt to break free, but this was in vain because the creature eventually reached Naruto's neck, opening its jaw wide and sinking its teeth into it. With a primal roar, Naruto imitated the creature in front of him and sank his teeth deep into the side of its neck. His eyes turned red, his canines grew longer, and his hair grew wilder. Naruto's world went white at that moment as he felt the intense pain of the bite. Astonished by this action, the Worgen instantly withdrew, only to have a piece of his neck and shoulder torn off. The Worgen leader leapt back a few feet and held his wound while Naruto began to stagger to his feet. Naruto's eyes were as they usually were when he transformed, blood red with a black slit in the middle, full of so much primal rage that even the Worgen shrank under his menacing gaze. Roaring at the injured Worgen leader, Naruto rushed at him, trying to rend him with his bare hands. Well, his claws. But this proved challenging because every Worgen there was now trying to defend their leader. Worgen suddenly began to rush Naruto from all directions in an attempt to bring him down, but it was as though they were throwing tissues at him for all the good it did, and it was as though he were an animal tearing through Worgen's ranks, ripping, slicing, or kicking Worgen after Worgen. This went on until the Worgen leader finally let out a cry of excruciating pain, which made all the other Worgen turn and run in his direction. After a brief period of apparent communication, the leader gave a series of painful commands, and they all turned and fled. Naruto was able to use a clawed clothesline to push the Worgen to the ground in a heap as he continued to run away. The creature roared in what seemed to be defiance as he got close enough to look into his eyes, and Naruto roared back, grabbing the Worgen's throat and ripping it out of its socket. After the body thrashed on the ground for a few seconds before becoming motionless, Naruto immediately fell to the ground upon realizing that no enemies remained. After that, there was only the stench of death in the air, and everything became quiet. It seemed like a typical day in Darkshire, with everyone going about their daily lives as usual. That all changed, though, when a howl that the Night Watch was familiar with echoed through the forest, and Althea Ebenlock saw that it originated from the area where the blonde stranger went. "Captain." She addressed her call to Captain Helva's Grange, who was in charge of a special Night Watch scout unit. "Yes, Commander? Take your unit and go scout out near the mine to the south." "The one in which it is claimed that the Worgen appeared?" "Yes, I sent a man there on a mission, and he might be having problems." The captain then patted the horn at his belt and said, "Go and see what has happened. If you need assistance, you know what to do." "Will do, milady." He quickly gathered the rest of his unit and headed south along the trail, making good progress until they passed the graveyard, where the undead that frequently visited that area appeared along the path. "Look out, ambush." When the first one came near, the captain used his shield to block its swipe and slashed it down the middle. His entire unit was accustomed to fighting undead, so they had no trouble completing the attack. After slamming the monster with his shield and knocking it to the ground, Captain Helvas used his sword to cut off its head. It wasn't the same taint that pervaded the forest. Everyone had grown accustomed to that. This was worse, far worse. It seemed much more primordial and ancient. "Good job, but we have to," everyone said, suddenly becoming motionless as a heavy aura suddenly filled the air. "Let's get going quickly." Running down the trail, they came around a tree's edge and came upon the battlefield. As they looked toward the middle of it, they saw the blonde child his commander had mentioned finish tearing out one of the Worgen's throats before falling to the ground. As his unit formed a protective formation around them, he hurried out to the blonde and knelt next to them. As the captain looked over the blonde, he noticed the bite mark on the child's neck. At first, he thought the wound was completely healed, but then a red substance began to pour from the wound's interior, and he started sewing the tissue back together. "What in the world is that?" Normally, a Worgen bite would kill a person within a short period of time, but this child is not only surviving but also recovering. "Bandage him up, we'll take him back to Darkshire." "Yes, sir." The captain stood up, looked around, and whistled in wonder at what the boy had accomplished. "I must say this boy fights like a demon if this means anything." "Mister? Just rambling, nothing. Are you done yet?" "Just finished now, sir. He's as patched as we can get him." "Good, let's get him back and report to Althea. She does not like to be kept waiting." When he opened his eyes, Naruto's world was hazy for a few seconds before it cleared up and became clear once more. He was in a bed, and based on the appearance of the room, he was in the inn where he had spent the previous night. "Are we finally up?" Naruto rubbed his eyes, trying to keep them open, while he sat up in bed and looked to the side of his bed to see the commander sitting in a chair next to his bed. "How much time was I absent?" "A couple of hours at least, though to be honest I am surprised that you're alive at all." "What's the reason?" She gestured to his neck. Rubbing at his shoulder, he saw bandages there and began to unwrap them, but Althea stopped him. "You were bitten by one of them, weren't you?" Don't touch those. They're there to cover your wounds and prevent them from getting worse. He simply dismissed her. He finished removing the last of his bandages and rubbed the sore area underneath it, saying, "Don't worry, I heal really fast." Normally, wounds didn't leave scars on him, but beneath the bandages, there was a shallow remnant of a scar that covered his shoulder. "I'm surprised that's all that is left behind. You don't know how lucky you are, kid." "What's the reason?" For a moment, she appeared uncomfortable. "Do you recall the infection I mentioned?" Naruto nodded, dragging up the memory. "It is known that this infection is fatal. It is a miracle in and of itself to see that you are awake, or better yet, alive." She could tell Naruto was trying to avoid talking about him when he said, "Yeah, well. Let's just say that due to some circumstances I heal extremely well." Naruto became alert at this point. "Anyway, about that payment I owe you." She tossed him a sack that looked like it was full of cash, saying, "I believe this will cover your services plus a nice bonus for you too." He took the bag and opened it, his eyes widening at the heap of gold coins inside. "Indeed, this will more than suffice." "That's wonderful to hear. Could I ask what you plan to do next?" "Is it feasible for me to remain for the remainder of the day if that is okay with you?" "Naturally, while you're sleeping, think about the room on the house." "Well, it's time for me to go," she said, rising from her chair and closing the door after giving him one final grin. She didn't even appear to notice the person sitting next to her, and her expression darkened. How is he still alive? The individual in question shook her head while still wearing priest robes. This piqued her interest even more. "Honestly, Commander, I am not sure why, though it might have something to do with the boy's mana, if you could call it that." "What are you saying?" As she turned to face the priest, she noticed that she was beginning to remove the bandages from her hand. She let them drop and held up her hand so Althea could see it. Her eyes widened a little as Althea looked at her hand and noticed that the middle of her palm appeared to have been burned before being healed. Where did that come from? Some kind of energy was seeping out of the boy's shoulder wound when I tried to treat it. It felt as though I had placed my hand in the middle of a fire after applying some healing magic to the wound. What causes the scar? Burns can typically be healed back to their original condition. That energy is something else. Even with my healing magic, it will be some time before this disappears. What sort of energy do you believe it to have been? She gave it some thought and shook her head. Despite appearing composed on the outside, Althea was unsure of how to respond to this information. "I can't be sure since this is not my field, but it seemed to be demonic in origin." "Commander, what should we do now?" Althea considered it for a moment before responding. "What are our options? I don't even know what to do with him at this point, and we don't have enough information to take any action. Will your hand be okay?" "I should be fine now. All I feel is a dull throbbing." The priest gave Althea a small nod before turning around and walking away, leaving her to ponder. "Okay, then you may go back to your duties." As he left the inn where he had stayed, he looked around and saw people going about their daily lives, many of whom were smiling and looking at him, while others waved as they went by. Unaccustomed to all the attention, he simply waved back shyly. He also noticed one of the Night Watch, who he could actually remember from his memory. "Hey!" Naruto ran up to him and saw that he was leaning against a fence post, favoring one leg. "Hey kid, how are you recovering from that?" "I'm a quick healer, so I'll be alright. How about you?" Berthold pointed to his ribs. "Doc says it'll be a while before I'll be able to go back on duty again, probably a week or two." Cuthford waved it away and said, "I'm sorry to hear that. Hey, if it weren't for you I wouldn't be alive at all, so don't worry about it. In fact, I should be thanking you." "It's no problem at all. Couldn't let you be zombie food now, could I?" "What are you doing now?" "I hope not." Cuthford raised an eyebrow and said, "I'm actually going to stay in town for the rest of the day and head out tomorrow." "You should stay longer. You've only been here 2 days. Althea would be delighted to assign you additional tasks, I'm sure." Cuthford sighed and shook his head, saying, "Thanks, and she already has, but I have to go. I only have a limited time here, so I have to go make the best of it while I can." "Well, you had better make sure to pay us a visit. After what you did with that undead thing, you'd be welcome here." "But of course." Naruto then turned and left to investigate Darkshire. As he strolled around the town, most people seemed to know that he was the one who had stopped the abomination from destroying their home, which immediately made Naruto popular. People would stop him to thank him, smile at him, and even shake his hand. Since Naruto had never been what he considered well-liked in Konoha, the attention was both embarrassing and refreshing. The people of Konoha truly valued what he did for them, and whenever he returned from a mission, the locals would treat it as if it were a daily occurrence. Despite this, he was treated like a celebrity by these people who were fighting for their lives almost every day. Choosing not to leave Darkshire for the remainder of the day, Naruto explored the town hall, the southern farms, and even the Griffin's landing area for travelers. Since this was the first time he had ever seen a griffin, he was enthralled for a while. Eventually, he felt that it was getting late because he couldn't see the sky clearly, so he went to the inn to eat dinner and go to bed. Naruto entered the inn and sat down at one of the many tables that were open. After a brief moment of waiting, a waiter arrived at his table and placed a glass of water in front of him. "What will it be, sweetie?" Naruto took a moment to gather himself after noticing that his waiter was very attractive. "Huh? Oh, sorry about that, him. What would you suggest?" his waiter asked, adopting a contemplative stance. Naruto accepted it without really knowing what to anticipate. "Well, right now our special is seasoned wolf kebabs. Some nice travelers before you managed to get us quite a supply of it before they left." The woman nodded and winked before leaving a flushed Naruto sitting there giggling uneasily to himself. "That sounds good, I'll take an order of that please." Naruto was sitting there surveying the restaurant when he saw a man stumbling past his table, tripping, and collapsing on his face. Naruto shrugged and resumed drinking his water after simply staring at the man on the ground. He was surprised, though, when the man used the rumple of his jacket to lift Naruto out of his chair. Naruto simply sighed inwardly at the utter foolishness people occasionally displayed. "Hey brat, it isn't kind to trip people, you know. Why is it that someone always wants to start a fight? Look, I didn't trip you, this is just a..." Naruto simply gave up and let out a loud sigh, saying, "Brat, I might have to teach you some manners when talking to an adult." The man appeared to be a bum based on his features. He was dressed in dark blue trousers and shoes and a tattered black shirt. Despite having short, black hair, the man managed to look disheveled. Naruto noticed a tattoo of a sword covering a cog on the man's arm. Naruto made the decision to wrap things up quickly. "Sorry, but you asked for this. Oh, that brat has a big mo." He struck both arms simultaneously, knocking away the hands holding Naruto up. Without waiting for him to recover, he then struck the guy's jaw with an open hand. It literally stopped him talking, but it also knocked the man off his feet and onto his back. Looking around, Naruto saw that everyone in the inn was staring at him with approval and that no one was trying to stop him. The waiter who had taken his order abruptly emerged from the rear with it and saw the body. He sighed and pointed to the man at their feet, asking, "Miss, what should I do with the trash?" The woman simply shook her head. "Just throw him outside, he should have known someone sooner or later would have enough of him. He's done this before." Naruto picked up the body and threw it over his shoulder before heading to the entrance and setting the man down outside before returning inside to finish his meal. He's been here for a while just causing trouble, though not enough to warrant the night watch's concern. The man was able to recover from unconsciousness, get up unsteadily, rub his jaw, and leave the town and head west as Naruto returned to finish his meal. Naruto happily patted his full belly after finishing his meal. The wolf meat had been a little tough, but not enough to stop him from eating it. In fact, it kind of reminded him of chicken. The waiter came up, briefly closed his eyes, and picked up his plate and glass. "So how was the meal, hun?" Before the waiter corrected him, Naruto started searching through his money bag and said, "It was very good, thank you." Naruto grinned at the kindness before rising and making his way to the stairs. "Commander says to give you room and board on the house, so that's what we gonna do." The waiter turned around, shook her head, and then gave up, saying, "I'll pay you back somehow." Heading upstairs to his room, Naruto undressed, flopped into bed, and fell asleep as soon as his head touched the pillow. "Okay, then, surprise us later on when you return." Naruto was on his way back to Karazhan after waking up and bidding farewell to everyone he had met during his stay, until he reached a fork in the road. He could try to get past the ogre camp that guards the entrance to Karazhan, or he could leap down the valley and return to Karazhan by walking down the river. Alright, so it's either going down into a deep, dark valley or fighting an entire tribe of ogres. The valley wins. Naruto jumped off the stone bridge and landed on a ledge in the rock wall after estimating the distance. He leapt even lower and landed on another one. He leapt to the other side of the valley and began running down the wall, approaching the river more and more. When he spots another ledge, he jumps back across, lands on it, then jumps down and lands on the river's surface. Naruto crossed the river and headed up past the abandoned houses, intending to enter Karazhan and train for the remainder of his stay. Regretfully, on this particular day, fate chose to mess with Naruto. "Ah dear you are." Naruto turns to face the voice and notices an ogre seated in front of the door. It hobbled up to Naruto after getting out of its seat. Fearing an attack, Naruto positioned himself defensively, waiting for it to strike. Strangely enough, that never materialized because it skidded to a stop a few feet ahead of him. Naruto, however, remained vigilant. "What do you want? You're da big boss now." "Huh? Since you beat Kolbein you da new big boss now." "Huh? Yeah, they don't think you should be da big boss, but you'll show them. Huh? The ogre then started to ascend the path toward the other ogres' residences, saying, since you defeated the last one and that proves you are the strongest, now come on, I'm gonna introduce ya to the rest so you can show dem da big boss. A few seconds passed while he stood there, watching the ogre leave. Hey, hurry up. The ogre turned around and walked back to Naruto, saying, I'm sorry, but what? I'm still confused, what are you doing? Talkin' you back to da tribe so they know you da boss now. Naruto cleared his throat after staring at the figure in front of him incredulously. Boss? Yeah, I don't think that would work out too well. Why not boss? Naruto liked being called boss, both as a giant ogre and as a Konohamaru, despite his best efforts to dissuade himself. He wondered what it was like to be referred to as Hokage. Well, as you can tell, I'm not exactly the same species as you guys for one. You're not da saying what? Naruto slapped his forehead angrily before calming down. I'm not the same as you, I'm human. So? Naruto asked, unable to think of anything to say. The ogre shook its head and said, isn't your tribe led by one of your own kind? Naruto still found it hard to accept the statement, nah, whoever is da strongest is the one who leads us. So you've had a leader that was different from you? No. So what makes you think they would even let it happen now? Naruto was constantly tempted for a leadership role like Hokage, but this seemed wrong in a lot of ways on a lot of levels. Well, you are da strongest. Everyone knows how Kolbein was beaten by a Hummy thanks to his guards telling in. What if I say no? Naruto was about to tell him to do so when he was interrupted. It would have been interesting to see a Humi try to be boss for once, but a nutter would probably take Kolbein's place after a round of fightin'. You live down deer in the tower, right boss? Yeah, why? Naruto considered the situation and his options. Well, if you don't become boss, you will probably have a lot more of our tribe come to kill you now that you killed Kolbein. In addition to having a massive undead dragon at his disposal, he could, on the one hand, hide out in the tower and be perfectly content, but it's unlikely that he would feel good about having genocide on his conscience. Yeah, I still don't think that will work. Even if I accepted, I wouldn't be here enough to be considered a boss. Naruto arched an eyebrow and said, you don't have to worry about dat boss. Naruto had run out of excuses. Kolbein would leave at random and then show up again. As long as you come back sometime, you should be fine. I wouldn't even know what to do. Why are you insisting that I do this? Because you are the strongest boss, no one else here is stronger than you. Is that it? Just because I'm strong is why you want me to be your leader? Naruto was about to say, no, when he suddenly had an epiphany. Yeah. Isn't that how your kind does it? The strongest ninja in the entire village was selected to be the Kage, so the ogre was correct. At least for the ninja world. He sighed in exasperation as he considered the circumstances and ultimately gave up. The ogre nodded as if he hadn't heard his previous statement. Okay. I'll go to your village and see if they would accept me. Though if they don't, then I'm off, okay? Sure thing, boss, now let's go. It led through a mouth of the entrance, and he followed the ogre along the path he had previously taken. Two more ogres, who were probably guards, appeared and stopped him. The other ogre scratched its head thoughtfully, asking, hey Hummy, what should we do with it? How about we break it then eat it? The first of the ogre guards scratched his head in contemplation before realizing, there won't be no eating dis Hummy, dis one is da one who beat da other boss. Ah yay, I remember dat. The other guard was still unaware of this. Remember what? Old boss was beat by a Humi, this must be him. They weren't upset that a human was stronger than them, rather, they were more shocked than anything else. Never heard of a Hummy bind boss before though. Naruto's escort began. Dis Hummy is special, I can feel it in my. Feel it in your what? I don't know, but I can feel it, Naruto exclaimed as he was escorted by an ogre. Naruto sneered, whatever, just don't be expecting a warm welcome boss Hummy. As he passed them, Naruto glanced around the tiny establishment and saw that it was much larger than he had anticipated. Don't worry, I'm not really expecting one. He saw a number of small huts lining the cliff wall, and some of them were even set into the wall higher up. Signs of the ogre's ruthlessness were everywhere in the small establishment. There were piles of animal corpses scattered throughout the camp, some of which appeared to be roughly humanoid. It had a somewhat ogreish sense of organization, but it wasn't what you would call a quality establishment. They were eventually led through the tiny village to a tent that seemed to belong to the boss, as they called it. Being constructed for an ogre twice Naruto's height may have contributed to the entrance's considerable height. His escort abruptly started calling out to the entire tribe. Attention ya gits. Dis is da new boss. Suddenly, the entire camp appeared to be frozen in time. Every ogre in the area was staring at the ogre that had brought him there before turning to face him. Then, as they gazed at one another, they all began to laugh uncontrollably. Even though Naruto kind of anticipated this, he was still irritated. "A hummy being da big boss. You must be jokin'," exclaimed one of the bigger ogres, who was still laughing. However, Naruto's escort would not tolerate it. He was soon whispering to Naruto, "Hey, he beat da other boss and dad shows that boss, what is your name? Oh, it's Naruto. And dad shows dat Naruto is da new boss." Everyone was staring in silent shock, waiting for something to happen. Instead of laughing, they were spared a long wait. One of the ogres advanced to confront Naruto. As he stepped forward, he produced a large club that was not nearly as intimidating as Naruto's last battle. "I'll kill the Humi, then I'll be the big boss." Naruto turned to face his escort and started speaking with him. "So what now? Now you have to face Grug Deer and win. He challenged you after all." "Do I have to kill him?" Naruto nodded in agreement and proceeded to approach the Grug. "No, you don't have to, but it usually sets da others straight real quick." The other ogres were now forming a ring around them as they stood opposite one another. Grug rushed at Naruto, swinging the club wildly over his head as the ring was complete. The ogre charged forward, trying to perform an overhead smash and slam Naruto into the ground like a nail. Naruto then sidestepped into the creature's defense and punched the ogre in the stomach with a whip that resembled a rubber band. Although it felt to Naruto like he was punching a brick wall, the blow had an impact because the ogre bowed into it, causing bile to flow from its mouth. But before Grug could do anything, Naruto had already repelled his blow and delivered a spinning heel kick that struck the ogre square in the face. The ogre was actually lifted off its feet and landed on its back by the force of the kick. Naruto walked to the ogre's side, right next to his head, resisting the urge to rub his now sore foot. The ogre looked at Naruto, perplexed by the jargon, and asked, "Do you yield? Sigh. Do you give up?" The ogre snarled, shook his head, gave a small nod, and stumbled back to his starting position. Now, the ogre who had brought him there was carrying a weapon that appeared to be familiar. Ogres glanced at one another, but none of them appeared eager to confront the small human. "Anyone else want to challenge da boss?" The ogre spoke up once more a few seconds later. "Okay then, Naruto is da big boss now," he roared, and soon after, everyone else gradually joined in. The ogre then came up to Naruto brandishing a weapon. At that moment, Naruto realized it was the enormous flail that the enormous ogre had previously used against him. Naruto looked at it and saw that he couldn't use it, so he said, "Okay boss, dis be yours now." One, if you can call it that, was made for an ogre, not a human. Naruto would have to use both hands to grasp it, which was not ideal. Secondly, a ninja was not equipped to wield a flail of that magnitude. He pushed it back toward the ogre and said, "No." The ogre stared at him and then at the weapon in disbelief, saying, "It's yours now." Naruto, however, would not accept the statement, "I can't take this boss, this belongs to you now." The ogre looked stunned, then grinned and shook his head as he gazed at the weapon in awe. "Consider it a gift. Use it well." "Will do boss." All of the ogres that had gathered then returned to their previous activities, leaving Naruto and his ogre alone. "So, now what happens, because I won't be around all the time?" "Where do ya go boss?" "Well, let's just say that it's very far away." "Was another warlord appointed while Kolbein was away?" The ogre nodded his head. Although Naruto didn't particularly want to have to fight someone each time he returned, it appeared as though he had no other option, unless. "Hey. What's your name?" "I'm Garunk boss." Garunk's eyes widened when he asked, "How would you like to be second in command?" After making a faceplant, Naruto sighed and asked, "What's dat boss?" He was also unsure if he would comprehend the statement, "You would be my right-hand man?" Fortunately, though, he realized at last. Naruto nodded and asked, "You would do dat boss?" Garunk was nodding his head wildly as he said, "You would be in charge while I am away." "I'll do it boss." "Okay, well I have to go now, but if you guys need anything then go to the big tower you saw earlier and knock on the door. A ghost should answer it. If you need anything just tell him and he'll relay it to me." Surprised by the ogre's desire to see his tribe prosper, Naruto nodded, "Okay, will do boss. Now I'm going to go make sure we got enough foods to last us." After leaving, Naruto returned to the tower to train for the rest of the fight. "Well, now I'll leave it to you then Garunk." Berthold gave Naruto a crazy look and asked, "You want me to what?" Berthold rubbed his temples and sighed, "I know it sounds crazy, but they made me their new leader or something like that, and I don't want to have to deal with a whole tribe of ogres on my doorstep." The master sure knows how to pick his students. Very well, if one of them should come knocking, I will relay a message when you return. Thank you, Birth. Naruto hurried off to the library, made as many clones as he could, and started his training, reading. Yes, now go get on with your training. Naruto was waiting for the portal at the stable's entrance, and it was now around noon. Naruto had to juggle training and assisting Gurunk with the clan, which made the last 3 days interesting. Naruto never had much free time because of all the things Gurunk had asked him to do and his training in the tower. He was reflecting on everything that had transpired when the portal materialized before him, complete with chaotic energies. Naruto turned and walked through the portal, waving goodbye. The same feeling as when Naruto traveled through space the last time, only this time a little queasy when he finally reappeared in front of Medivh. So my boy, how did it go? Medivh arched an eyebrow in response, saying, "It was awesome, I got a lot stronger and I'm even a leader of the ogres now." You don't say. I thought you wanted to be Hokage? Medivh simply shrugged at his student's logic, saying, "Well, I guess this will be some good experience. Out of being the leader of a group of ogres or constantly fighting them, I thought that being the leader would be the lesser of two evils." Naruto continued his story about how he went to Darkshire and saved the town, along with the work he did for them, after asking, "Well, did you go somewhere?" Suddenly recalling that Naruto swore aloud, I said, "Well, my boy, it sounds like you were quite busy while you were there. I would go back to your village and rest for now. Your Hokage will probably be coronated soon." He ran out the door and headed back to the village, saying, "I totally forgot about that. I better get going before the old lady smacks me senseless." After saying, "It is almost time," the door shut. Naruto hurried into the Hokage's office, just as he used to do with the Sandaime. He didn't make it very far before being snatched by the collar and thrown into the air directly in front of Tsunade, who was now dressed in a Hokage robe. "Hey Bachan, did I ma? Brat, you know you missed a very important ceremony today. Is there anything you have to say before I send you to the hospital? Would it help any if I told you that I was trying to take over for you faster by training?" Naruto was about to be waylaid when a ninja burst through the door he had just entered, saving him. That's a sweet gesture, but no. "Hokage Sama, we have bad news. Sasuke Uchiha has left the village." Tsunade truly forgot about Naruto and put him back on his feet after hearing the news. "Hokage Sama, we have bad news. Sasuke Uchiha has left the village." Naruto, meanwhile, was equally shocked by that remark. Though he had recalled what Sasuke had said on their first day together, he never imagined Sasuke would go this far. "Who told you this information?" When Naruto learned that Sakura was already aware of it, his eyes widened. It was a Sakura Haruno, ma'am. "Bring Sakura Haruno here at once." "Yes, Hokage Sama." Tsunade began to consider her options as the ninja departed. After giving it some thought, she looked at Naruto and then returned to her thoughts. Shit. Why did he have to leave now? We don't have a hunter team to spare at the moment and all the elite Jonins are out on missions. Naruto cleared his mind before nodding and walking away without a word. "Sai, I guess I have no other choice, and we need to act fast. Naruto, I need you to go get Shikamaru and tell him to report to my office 10 minutes ago." Naruto created about 24 clones after leaving the tower, and they dispersed throughout the village to find the slothful genius. Walking down one of Konoha's main streets, Shikamaru had just finished lunch with Choji and was relieved that the trouble was over. The two of them were not sure where they were going. Choji glanced at his friend before answering, "Sai, well, at least now that all the commotion is over, we can relax a bit. You know that since we're ninja, we're probably gonna have to be called to help with the repairs soon." Before Choji could reply, a blonde blur appeared in front of them, almost startling them. "Yeah, but before that I hope to get a good nap in." The first person to speak up was Shikamaru. "Naruto, what are you doing here?" Shikamaru sighed and regretted not being able to take a nap. "The old lady needs you to report to her office now." Hearing that infuriated Naruto, but it also made him question whether he had been promoted. "What is it this time? She already made me a chunin, what else is there?" Almost instantly, both of them were drawn to the statement, "It's Sasuke. He's left the village." "Sigh. And here I was thinking I could relax for a bit," Shikamaru said, shaking his head, accepting the fact that he might as well go there right away. Shikamaru nodded to Choji respectfully before turning back to face Naruto. "I'll join you, Shika. You may end up needing some help after you talk to her." "What about you?" Shikamaru appeared a little perplexed. "Well, obviously I'm going too. I have a feeling I know what she's planning anyway." "You have an idea of what's going on? Wow, that's new." Naruto was chuckled at by Shikamaru and Choji, who then leapt for the tower, saying, "Hey, don't make me whip your ass." Naruto simply grinned and said, Hurry up, Naruto, we're going to leave you behind. Naruto abruptly poofed into smoke, leaving Choji speechless for a moment before he realized it was a clone. Way ahead of you too. Come on Choji, let's go and get this over with. Shikamaru interrupted her by raising his hand and saying, this may be on short notice, but I am now assigning you 3 with an A-ranked mission. It is of the utmost importance. Tsunade looked at him as she answered, keeping her chin in her interlocked hands. Is it about Sasuke deserting the village? She asked. They all just stood there waiting for her to continue while they thought about what she had said. Yes, due to the invasion we are dangerously low on manpower, and the manpower we do have are all already on missions to help bring in funds for the rebuilding effort. So due to the extreme circumstances I am assigning you all on an A-ranked mission to retrieve Sasuke Uchiha and bring him back to the village at all costs. Shikamaru is going to be the squad leader. Any questions? Once more Shikamaru was the first to speak up. Will it only be the 3 of us? The 3 of you and anyone that is available that you think would be of help? Before responding, Tsunade shuffled a few documents and asked, whom of the rookie 9 are in the village at the moment? Right now the only ones that I see are available that aren't on missions are Neji, Hyuga and Kiba Inuzuka. They're perfect. There is one more question though Hokage, Sama. What is it Shikamaru? Everyone was a little perplexed by the way he phrased the question, what condition are we to bring him back in? Until Naruto clarified everyone's confusion. What the hell are you talking about Shikamaru? As though he were referring to the weather, he replied, I'm talking about bringing him back dead or alive. All of the people in the room were taken aback by this, but Tsunade displayed no visible signs of surprise. But before Naruto could scold him and call him a fool, Tsunade resolved any urgent matter. We need him alive Shikamaru, no matter how serious an offense this is we can't kill him, yet. As Shikamaru hurried out of the tower, he turned to face Naruto and said, I need you guys to head out immediately, you're dismissed. Nodding, Naruto created a few dozen clones and dispatched them to different locations in an attempt to locate Kiba and Neji. Naruto, I need you to find and tell Kiba and Neji to meet us by the front gates, Hokage's orders. Although they appeared somewhat perplexed, Naruto, Choji, and Shikamaru did not have to wait long for Neji and Kiba to appear as they reached the gate. Neji simply nodded, thinking the same thing. So why are we here Shikamaru, what's up? Both of them were taken aback when he said, well you two we have been assigned a mission to retrieve Sasuke Uchiha and bring him back to the village no matter the cost. Neji didn't express this as much as Kiba did, though. Shikamaru shook his head, asking, what happened? Was he kidnapped? Both appeared even more shocked until Shikamaru spoke up once more, saying, if only. He abandoned the village and is now headed towards the border. We are to bring him back to the village alive so we best get moving quickly if we are going to catch up to him, and they began their journey. The man standing between Naruto and the box containing Sasuke was on the other side of the field. I'm guessing there isn't a way for you to hand over the box and we both can go? I am afraid not. Lord Orochimaru wishes to possess Sasuke Uchiha and he shall have him. Not if I have anything to say about it. Naruto hurried over and tried to kick Kimimaro in the head with a sweeping motion. Kimimaro counterattacked by thrusting Naruto's face with an open hand while leaning back out of range. Naruto then shifted his head to the left and tried to strike Kimimaro's guard with a blow to the ribs, but Kimimaro sidestepped out of his way and he was evaded once more. Naruto and Kimimaro kept exchanging blows back and forth, with neither of them really winning. From a distance, it would appear as though the two of them were dancing, with Kimimaro simply continuing to dodge and try to land a blow whenever he could and Naruto constantly trying to counterattack while dodging. When Naruto noticed that his opponent was attempting another open-handed thrust in his face, he tried something new. Rather than sidestepping as he usually did, he leaned back just enough to keep his balance and be able to grab his arm. Regretfully, things did not turn out the way he had hoped. He looked into Kimimaro's eyes as he was responding to the thrust and realized right away that something wasn't right. Even though it was brief, Naruto was able to get him to begin pulling his head back even more. Although it wasn't enough to cause him any real harm, something sprang from his opponent's wrist, scratching his forehead and removing his headband in the process. Just as Kimimaro was launching a counterattack, Naruto's self-preservation instincts took over and he had to jump back out of range. And he did it right on time when he noticed the spot where his opponent's hand would have struck him. This hand also had a sharp, white fragment that looked almost like bone emerging from his wrist. Naruto raised his hand to his forehead and felt the familiar weight of his headband, but he also noticed some blood. He snarled even though he knew it would heal. He produced about 24 clones, all of whom rushed Kimimaro, after drawing out a kunai and slightly flourishing it. Kimimaro started to perform a literal and symbolic dance of death, pulling a bone fragment from his other hand as well. The issue with Naruto's fighting style and the use of shadow clones was that the maneuvering space needed for this style became extremely limited when so many clones attempted to attack a single person. Naruto simply kept popping them like balloons while he was crowded and trying to get a piece of Kimimaro. Ignoring tact, Naruto charged in and tried to slit Kimimaro's face with the kunai in his left hand as the final clone was popped. Kimimaro ducked once more by bending back from the kunai, but Naruto chose to use one of his new maneuvers this time. Despite missing Kimimaro, Naruto continued to slash without noticing his other hand pull back like a puppeteer pulling strings. Naruto was uncertain about his ability to use this effectively because he had not used it in real combat, but his concerns were unwarranted when Kimimaro's upper body abruptly lunged back forward. Kimimaro's eyes widened as he flew forward, startled by his sudden involuntary spasm, and Naruto's kunai hand returned in a swift, backhanded stabbing motion. It made a dull thunk instead of the deadly stab he had hoped it would be, against the chest of Kimimaro. Naruto's turn now, and he widened his eyes when he saw that his kunai stopped before even penetrating an inch deep. With some sympathy in his eyes, Kimimaro gazed down at Naruto, but he was still wondering what had happened to cause him to fall forward. Naruto quickly took advantage of his opponent's explanation of how his abilities operated by saying, "As you can see, I can also harden the bones in C." He was never able to comprehend why many ninjas did that, but that is irrelevant. Naruto performed the fastest pressure spell he could manage by swinging his other hand forward and making contact with his chest. The pressure spell that Naruto had learned was one of the more practical ones that he had seen when he was going through all of Medivh's books. The only drawback was that it required direct contact or a distance of only a few inches between his target and his hand for the spell to be effective. And it worked, because a loud crack reverberated throughout the open field as Naruto finally let go of his pressure spell. Kimimaro was left stunned and unable to speak. What just took place? The only survivor had a lot of questions right now, and that was just one of them. Looking slowly in the direction of his chest, which appeared to have a big bowl-shaped crater where his bone armor was. Kimimaro was knocked to his knees as if his body had finally realized it was hurt. Naruto gazed in wonder and mild disgust at his findings. He hadn't really examined the spell's effects when he had previously faced the previous ogre chieftain and cast it, but this time he was up close and could see his destruction clearly. There was now a crater where Naruto could easily fit his hand where he had hovered it. But he still had Sasuke to bring back, so this was no time to ponder. He turned around and headed for the large case that contained Sasuke, but he had to shield his eyes from the sudden outburst of vile energy that came from it. It became thicker until at last the top flew off, revealing Sasuke's figure gradually. But before he could speak, Sasuke leapt from the crate and headed toward the border, into the forest. Kuso. He was about to run away in pursuit when Kimimaro gave him another energy boost. Black lines began to spread out from the strange tattoo on his chest and covered his entire body. His mouth began to leak blood like a faucet from the sides. The crushed bones were dissolving and being replaced by new ones with a sickening snap. Sensing that this fight was going to get much harder, he assumed a fighting stance and was ready to use all of his abilities, even the ones he was concealing. However, a figure leapt between Kimimaro and Naruto before anything could happen. Then the figure turned and grinned so brightly that it almost blinded him. Bushy brow. Naruto gave Lee a thank you nod and left, following Sasuke's lead. Yes, Naruto-kun, it is I. But now is not the time for conversation. You must hurry and get Sasuke-kun. They argued for a moment. Now, Naruto was glaring from the statue across from Sasuke on the head of an unknown ninja. Sasuke paused and slowly turned around, revealing his face. "So are you gonna run off like the Teme you are?" he asked. When Naruto noticed that his eye was now yellow and that the side of his face still bore the marks from his seal, he grimaced. Naruto simply glared at him, saying, "So she sent you of all people, why am I not surprised?" Despite Naruto's best efforts to ignore the jab, Sasuke always managed to irritate him. "Oh, it seems the Dobi is upset. I only have one question, Sasuke." Why? Sasuke started to laugh ominously. He cocked his head to the side, still grinning, and said, "With Orochimaru's power, I will be able to achieve my goal. I will no longer be held back from obtaining true power while all you others continue to play ninja." He heard footsteps behind him and turned to head towards his destiny. "So I'll tell you what, just leave me alone and we won't have a problem." He was startled to see Naruto standing a few feet away from him as he spun around in anticipation of an attack. "You think I'll let you go after everything we've been through, everything everyone has risked to bring you back? I'll bring you back even if I have to break your arms and legs." Sasuke simply laughed again before raising his hand in a gesture. He balled his hand into a fist and said, "If you are going to be so persistent." He tried to grab Naruto in the stomach, but Naruto's left hand clamped down on his wrist and his right hand grabbed his elbow. "Then I'll just have to go through you." He then threw Sasuke across the valley in the direction of the statue he had occupied before doing a 180 spin. Sasuke abruptly felt the power from earlier draw back into the seal, landing on his feet and skidding a little as he glared at Naruto. Naruto, meanwhile, had a tiny smile on his face. "I'm not the same as before either, Sasuke." After they had finished speaking, Naruto leapt to his side, and Sasuke followed suit, trying to beat Naruto to the punch in the face. Still enraged from their previous exchange, Naruto backhanded the fist out of the way, then twisted his right hand into a fist and felt it strike Sasuke's left cheek. The Uchiha was flung toward the statue's chest by the impact, and as gravity took over, he began to fall as well. Astonished by the force of the alleged Dobi's punch, Sasuke flipped in midair, his feet hitting the statue's chest before being propelled off in a direction that was once more directed at Naruto. After noticing this, Naruto used his legs to create a clone that was standing in front of him. He then pushed off the clone's back and returned to his statue. With his Sharingan activated, Sasuke saw the clone approaching and rolled to avoid it. However, he was unable to unwind for long because he saw the real Naruto bounce off his statue and return for another pass. This time, both of them were striking each other with blow after blow as they collided in midair. This isn't possible. The Dobi can't possibly be too quick to see far ahead. It was also true that Sasuke was unable to move quickly enough to block Naruto's blows, regardless of what he witnessed him doing. That, along with the way he fought, was certainly not what he remembered. In actuality, though, Naruto had never really had a style other than street fighting, and even then, street fighters were still more skilled than Naruto. But that was no longer the case. Whenever Sasuke attempted to hit Naruto, he would always dodge an attack at the same time, or counter strike in some other manner. Even so, enough blows were delivered to slightly roughen Sasuke up. They both kept falling toward the bottom, and all of this occurred in a matter of seconds. After an attempted blow, Sasuke finally took control and was able to push off Naruto's body, sticking to the cliff rock behind the waterfall. Naruto, on the other hand, simply fell with a splash to the water below. However, he was only down for a short while because Naruto quickly leapt out of the water and skidded across the surface, gaining some distance. The crackle of electricity was soon audible after choosing to forego taijutsu and performing the appropriate hand seals. Chidori. In response to Sasuke's Chidori, Naruto extended his hand and used a Rasengan. He wasn't concerned, even though he was interested in what he believed that tiny ball could accomplish. "That little ball won't do anything to my ultimate technique, Chidori." Sasuke let go of the wall and fell toward the river, but before he hit the water, he regained his footing on the rocks and pushed off, sending himself in Naruto's direction. When Naruto saw Sasuke fall, he rushed forward to try to confront him. Naruto and Sasuke both reached out as they got closer, and their methods clashed. When the two methods collided, a water storm spread everywhere but in the vicinity of the two techniques. It would appear to be Sasuke and Naruto fighting in the middle of a storm if someone were to look at it. Sasuke and Naruto were both having trouble using their respective techniques to overwhelm the other. Sasuke's Chidori persisted in trying to pierce Naruto's Rasengan, but neither appeared to be winning. The force of the explosion they produced was sufficient to send both of them flying back across the water when they attempted to push at each other simultaneously. The two of them glared at one another as they slowly stood up. They simply stood there, scowling at one another, until they both suddenly took action. Naruto hurried to action, darting side to side until he was within range, and then executed a spinning butterfly kick. Even with his Sharingan active, Sasuke was taken aback by the move that was just thrown at him and managed to avoid it by swerving away from the kick's intended trajectory. In an attempt to counterattack, Sasuke attempted a leg sweep just as Naruto landed, but he was unable to see him land and continued his spin, sending an uppercut into Sasuke's chin. He then nailed him in the cheek with another of those strange flip kicks, avoiding his sweep. He then whipped back around in the hopes of avoiding the next attack. Sasuke, who had been sent flying into the air, attempted to regain consciousness when he felt a firm hold on his leg. When he looked down, he saw that Naruto had leapt to his feet and grabbed hold of his ankle. Why did he? He then noticed that Naruto's chain extended from the original, which was still dangling from his clone's ankle. Before Sasuke could even allow the shock to register on his face, Naruto spun the chain of clones 180 degrees, causing the final one to release his grip on his ankle. Sasuke was sent skipping across the river like a stone being skipped across a pond until he finally settled on the water, thanks to the combined force of all the clones that went into that throw. He got back up quickly and met Naruto's rush just in time. After deflecting Naruto's blow, Sasuke attempted a direct blow to Naruto's nose. When Naruto noticed this, he raised his left arm and pushed Sasuke's arm sideways before bringing his right fist around for another blow. Sasuke then pushed to the side once more in an effort to clock Naruto in the side of the head. Naruto managed to block the blow by turning his body so that his back was to Sasuke. He then used his right arm to elbow Sasuke in the stomach. Sasuke received no respite, but he retreated a half second later when Naruto struck him in the face with the back of his hand. As he finished, Naruto retreated a step and kicked Sasuke in the chest, causing him to fall a few feet onto his back and plunge into the river. "No, I refuse to be humiliated in this manner. I am the Uchiha clan's last member." Sasuke was unaware of his third Tomo's gain in his eyes at the time. Sasuke leapt out of the water and started to shove chakra to his feet. He appeared to be skating across the water as a result. Naruto hurried in to confront the Uchiha once more after witnessing Sasuke leap out of the water in such a manner. This time, Sasuke initiated the attack by bringing a right hook around, but Naruto parried it as he was about to deliver a counterblow. This time, though, Sasuke was stopped because he had continued his punch, turning his leg around and kicking Naruto in the stomach. Naruto snarled in agony as he attempted to seize Sasuke's leg but was pulled back. Sasuke and Naruto kept exchanging punches, kicks, and counterattacks, with one of them occasionally landing a blow. This time, though, it seemed to be fairly evenly distributed. What the devil just occurred? What is he doing? Naruto brought out clones to assist him in his attempt to tilt the playing field. Though he did occasionally have them mob and attack, he also had some doing less visible work. Some Narutos remained behind and waited for chances to attack, while others were flying in from above as the other Narutos continued to mob Sasuke. Sasuke attempted to look around for the original as he destroyed clone after clone. Sasuke began to say, "Where are you?" but stopped short when he felt someone grabbing his ankles from below. Cuss. Suddenly, he was lifted higher and higher into the air as a continuous chain of Narutos emerged from the water, spinning around like a rope. This went on until Sasuke was slammed onto the top of the cliff by Naruto's tower, where dust and debris obscured his vision from below. He saw a flaming flame cut through the smoke just as he thought it might be over. Kaden. Ryuka no Jutsu. Dragon Fire Technique for Fire Release. Like a chain of firecrackers, the flames swiftly burned along each clone, popping each one after the other until they finally struck the bottom of the chain, causing steam to fly everywhere. Now that his curse seal was on the first level, Sasuke approached the cliff's edge slowly and peered down at the river's surface. As the smoke cleared, he noticed Naruto standing there, apparently unharmed. Gathering a lot of chakra, Sasuke grinned in a way that only a Uchiha could. Kaden. Gokakyu no Jutsu. Grand Fireball Technique for Fire Release. Sasuke used this technique to release all of his stored up chakra and send it in Naruto's direction. The fireball was enormous and quickly traveled the distance between them. But as the fireball sped in his direction, Naruto remained motionless. The fire created enough steam to easily cover the entire river when it was sent crashing into the water. Sasuke was waiting for the steam to clear when something was hurled out of it and struck the cliff directly next to him. Sasuke was nearly thrown over the edge of the cliff when the unknown object exploded like a cannonball, taking a sizable portion of the cliff with it. Sasuke was about to move, surveying the damage quickly, when he noticed another object flying in his direction. He thought quickly, got up, and leapt off the edge, falling towards the river. He felt the explosion's force hit him just above him, causing him to fall a little faster before he managed to get his feet to grip the wall. When he eventually came to a halt, he looked down to see that the steam had subsided and that Naruto was standing there, two streams of water flowing into each hand to form large water globes. By using Rasengan's theory of compressing the chakra and his experimental method of controlling the water, Naruto had developed one of his earliest methods of water control and was now past the point of concealing anything. After finishing the water collection, Naruto focused and watched it contract to the size of a typical Rasengan. He launched it at Sasuke and started creating another one right away. Sasuke started running down the cliff while making hand signals as soon as the ball was launched sailing in the direction of its destination. The Phoenix Flower Technique for Fire Release, or Kaden. Hosenka no Jutsu. Sasuke launched dozens of smaller fireballs as he ran down the cliff, all of which were headed for Naruto. Naruto flipped out of the way of several fireballs after spinning to the right and throwing another of his water balls. As he landed, he threw up both hands, forming a temporary wall of water between himself and several of the fireballs. He let it fall, spun around, and swiftly created 2 water balls, launching them one after the other. After avoiding the next 2, Sasuke eventually made it to the bottom of the cliff and started running across the water in Naruto's direction while continuing to make hand signs. Debris from the canyon wall was still falling behind him. Kaden. Gokakyu no Jutsu, Grand Fireball Technique for fire release. The Uchiha trailed closely behind, sending another enormous ball of fire hurtling across the water. Behaving swiftly, Naruto launched his next attack side, armed square at Sasuke's fireball after packing as much water as he could into it. The water ball ultimately prevailed in the collision between it and the fireball, passing through its center like a bullseye, but not before losing its shape and exploding like a shotgun, launching a cone of blazing hot water forward. Sasuke was knocked back by the explosion, but the boiling water also gave him some very painful burns. With his curse seal still in effect, Sasuke stood up, grimacing and enraged, and engaged Naruto in close combat. Naruto's speed increased even further with his curse seal active, and when he added his Sharingan, he found it increasingly difficult to keep up with the Uchiha. Even though he occasionally got lucky, Sasuke's ability to predict his next move and appear to be faster than him was insufficient to defeat his improved opponent. Naruto ducked to avoid a backhand, then spun around to try to kick Sasuke in the head, but his head missed the mark. Sasuke was still grinning that arrogant grin and had both hands on his leg. Sasuke then threw Naruto a distance away while performing a 360. Naruto skidded a little across the water before jumping up into a backflip and landing on his feet just in time to watch Sasuke complete the final seal. Naruto became irritated with all of the fire being directed at him and did what he did best, think quickly. According to what he recalled about managing the human body, it must contain some water. He was thrilled to discover that there was, in fact, water where he needed it as he attempted to sense its presence. There wasn't much to work with effectively, but it was sufficient for his purposes. Naruto was timing his move as Sasuke threw back his head and leaned forward to throw his fireball. Naruto brought both of his hands together in a diagonal clap, as though he were clapping them together on a fly. Unconsciously, Sasuke's mouth clamped shut as he unleashed the technique that would hopefully end his rival's life. This clamping down is the origin of the term, bone jarring, not the pleasant clamping down you get when you bite into a sandwich. He also realized, with his mouth shut, that he had not stopped his technique. But since there was nowhere else for the flames to go, they could only go to his mouth. Sasuke tried to open his mouth as the flames burned the inside of it, but he was unable to do so. The pain was unbearable, so he tried to stop the chakra flow as best he could. However, as evidenced by the black, charred hole in his face, he failed to stop it in time to prevent damage. He was able to open his mouth once more after a few seconds, and he did so earnestly, letting smoke fly. Sasuke had to force himself not to scream as he reflexively put his hand to his mouth. His attempts to manage his pain, however, were short-lived because he only received a palm to the face when he turned to face his adversary. Sasuke had no idea what he was getting himself into, but he knew it would hurt. Sasuke was launched across the lake like a frozen line drive, and instead of landing on his ass after flying back a few feet, he continued to fly until he struck the base of the valley where the rock and water met. Sasuke was encircled by a spider web of cracks that spread out for a considerable distance due to the force of the collision. Sasuke saw spots and was yanked by an unseen force once more, sending him flying in Naruto's direction. As he flew, he noticed that Naruto seemed to be preparing for a punch, tensing up for the pain he was about to experience, and he closed his eyes. When he finally made contact with Naruto, it wasn't his fist. Instead, Naruto's leg was implanted into Sasuke's stomach, forcing up whatever was still there, including some blood. He was barely conscious when he was dropped into the water. He still made an effort to stand up. Naruto was growing increasingly irritated. How about you just remain down? Seeking a means of permanently eliminating Sasuke, or at the very least, putting him in jail until he could return to the village. Imprison. Brought back memories of Zabuza imprisoning Kakashi in a water prison. I don't know how it's supposed to be done, but it must be pretty strong if Kakashi-sensei couldn't break out of it. Naruto was able to control the water surrounding Sasuke, causing it to snake-like climb up his body. Sasuke was startled to see that the water was attempting to seize him when he felt something damp on his legs and looked down. The water seemed to remold itself, so clawing at it didn't work. Sasuke gasped for air and was filled with water as he finally covered his head. Once his entire body was submerged in water, Naruto began filling the remaining space with a water sphere to prevent Sasuke from moving. But nothing in Naruto ever goes as planned, just like everything else. It became increasingly difficult for him to keep up the pressure he was applying to Sasuke's body as he attempted to complete his prison. With nowhere to go, the energy that Sasuke was releasing from the seal pushed out against the water. Naruto could see that Sasuke's body was changing as well. His hair was growing longer, his skin was getting darker, and his eyes were getting darker as more and more energy was released. Two wing-like appendages managed to pierce the back of the water globe, giving the impression that his body was trembling inside the water. At last, Naruto could no longer handle it and it exploded. Naruto was unprepared for the fist he received to the face, but the force and compressed water were sufficient to send him to his ass before he resurfaced. Naruto was nearly able to keep up with the combination seal and Sharingan during the initial seal stage. However, Naruto was not doing well at all now that the seal and his Sharingan were both at the next level simultaneously. As Sasuke waylaid into Naruto, Naruto was now beginning to take a severe beating from Sasuke in this form. As Naruto began to feel the full force of the attack, he was being forcefully pushed back until Sasuke punched him in the face, sending him flying back. Naruto was now waking up more slowly than before and finding it more difficult to react. "Dude, I'm losing my vision." When Naruto saw 3 different Sasukes, he was hit repeatedly and had no real way of avoiding them. When Sasuke rushed forward, spun around, and slammed Naruto with one of his new wings, sending him flying back, Naruto made a feeble attempt to control Sasuke's body but was unable to do so quickly enough. He was roughly grabbed by the throat as he attempted to stand up again. And with this, my dream will become that much more a reality. Sasuke was holding what looked like a Chidori in his other hand, but it was black instead of the customary white. Naruto grabbed the arm that was holding him and attempted to free himself, but Sasuke simply held him there with all of his remaining strength. While Sasuke brought his technique around and jammed it through the middle of Naruto's chest, Naruto watched and kept trying to break free, but it was in vain. Naruto was taken aback, not by the pain, but by the absence of it. He could feel Sasuke's hand hitting his body, so he knew the technique had struck him. Naruto slowly, almost fearfully, glanced down at Sasuke's hand. Naruto only saw a coconut-sized hole where his chest should have been, instead of the portion of his body he had anticipated seeing. He began to bleed heavily, and the fact that he could see his own ribs did little to help either. He was startled to see that Sasuke was smiling, one of those grins you see on a crazy serial killer, when he looked back up at him. At that moment, Naruto understood that Sasuke would actually kill him in order to escape and visit Orochimaru. The outcome was obvious, regardless of whether it was due to the shock of the wound or the realization of Sasuke's fall distance. A blood-red chakra began to flow from the wound, mending the organs and flesh back together. But it wasn't just there that the chakra was emerging. He was now wearing a kind of cloak as the chakra poured out of every pore in his body, not with the tail, like when he faced Neji. Astonished to discover that Naruto was recovering, Sasuke dropped him and performed hand signals as rapidly as he could. After being dropped, Naruto was on his knees with his head bowed because he was unable to stand. With only a few feet between him and his target, Sasuke completed the hand signals and retreated, taking a deep breath and exhaling. Kaden. Gokakyu no Jutsu, Grand Fireball Technique for Fire Release. Sasuke let his fireball burn for a long time in the hopes of burning his opponent. When he was done, he noticed Naruto's distinctive form standing as the steam started to lift. Sasuke began to panic a little and made the hand signals for Chidori before sprinting in the direction of the figure and pushing his technique in the steam. Only to be stopped a foot away when a hand that appeared out of the steam and clamped down on Sasuke's wrist while wearing a red cloak of some kind. Unaware that Naruto was halting him with one hand, Sasuke kept trying to push against him, but he felt as though he was pushing against a mountain and didn't move an inch. Finally, putting all of his energy into improving his technique appeared to be the wake-up call Naruto needed. His slitted, blood-red eyes, which filled him with fear, suddenly snapped open. Naruto swiftly and effectively raised his other hand towards Sasuke's arm, just below the elbow, and struck. A crack was audible as Sasuke attempted to draw his arm back, but Naruto had to release it before it could happen. Sasuke was holding his hand and grimacing as he staggered back. Glancing at Naruto, he leapt out of range and performed additional hand signals. Kaden. Gokakyu no Jutsu, Grand Fireball Technique for Fire Release. These flames were not your typical red flames. They burned with a white-hot intensity that was nearly impossible to look at. After glancing at them as though they were merely an annoyance, Naruto roared back, powerful enough to send Sasuke flying back across the water and out onto the river, as well as to blast through the flames. Sasuke was able to land on his feet after flipping back with his wings, but Naruto's attack triggered a shockwave that struck the canyon wall across the river with enough force to shatter large pieces off the wall and into the water. Naruto was already on him and in the midst of an attack when Sasuke looked up. He tried to counter, barely able to do so, but Naruto tried to slit his chest, forcing him to dodge once more. Sasuke had no space to launch a counterattack after being pushed back. Though it was faster, wilder, and appeared to have real claws rather than just fingers, the fighting style was essentially the same as before. Sasuke was able to avoid all of the attacks, but he could still feel his skin burning with each near miss, suggesting that the chakra Naruto was now using was a kind of second body. Naruto finally got hit after his dodging got closer and closer to the wire. Sasuke screamed in agony as he lashed out and struck him in the chest with a leopard fist from his right, burning his body with both the force of the blow and his chakra. He forced the Uchiha to bend forward against his fist, throwing his other fist deep into Sasuke's stomach. By this point, whatever was left in Sasuke's stomach had been consumed. However, Naruto had much more in store for his friend, and wasn't finished yet. For Naruto, this portion of the battle was like a dream, but a very different kind of dream. He would fade in and out of battle, but when he was engaged in combat, he could feel his blood boiling and was instructed to destroy everything that hurt him, primarily Sasuke. In an attempt to counterattack, Sasuke executed a 360 spin into a kick that would hopefully strike Naruto in the head. Unfortunately for him, Naruto did not care what he had to do to bring Sasuke back at this point. Sasuke's head was sent reeling back from the force of the blow after landing an uppercut. When Naruto struck Sasuke's ankle with his open hand, he cast the proper spell, and Sasuke's ankle was instantly crushed. Unexpectedly, Sasuke let out a roar of agony, lost his fighting technique, and tried to bludgeon Naruto's face with his unbroken hand. This was stopped, though, when Naruto simply moved in Sasuke's guard, grabbed his left hand with his right, and struck Sasuke's forearm with an open-handed blow. Snap! Now that he was forced to stand on his one healthy leg while he struggled to remain conscious and fight, Sasuke was on the verge of fainting from the pain. Naruto simply smiled at Sasuke's bad luck and observed him for a short while as he attempted to come to. Naruto decided to have some fun and watch him suffer a little more, so he struck out with his left leg, breaking Sasuke's good ankle. Sasuke was forced to fall forward as a result, but Naruto caught hold of his hair and pulled him up before he could hit the water. Contact with the alien chakra caused Sasuke's head to burn, but he was powerless to stop it. Sasuke looked up and gave his rival the most hateful, contemptuous look he could manage. When Naruto raised his other hand, the one technique he had previously seen materialized. Sasuke saw Naruto use the technique to eliminate him, but then something occurred. He seemed to have been sprayed with cold water before realizing what he was doing. Striking Sasuke with this method would be retaliation, but it would also kill him given his current condition. He simply let his hand drop to his side, halting the chakra's flow. Naruto simply said, "You know, cough, you really are pathetic. You think that, cough, she'll like you after this?" Grasping his head more tightly, Naruto asked, "You think she actually cares about you?" Naruto wasn't sure he wanted to know, but he might as well bite. "When we talked before I left, you know what she said?" he asked. He had to force himself to say, "What?" Blood was spit in Naruto's face, but the chakra dissolved it before it could reach him. Naruto's mind went blank for a moment when he heard the statement, "She offered to abandon the village just so, cough, she could be with me, Udobi." He tried to convince himself that it wasn't true, but he questioned whether Sasuke had any other motivation than to harm him. After hearing that, he felt a strong desire to murder Sasuke. He brought his left hand around and slashed Sasuke's face with his new claws after dropping him to his knees. After being thrown into the water, Sasuke began to sink. After a few seconds, Sasuke's seal was finally beginning to lift, returning him to his initial state. "I told you I would bring you back, even if I had to break your arms and legs, and I keep my promises." At this point, the fox's chakra also ceased to function. Suddenly vanishing, Naruto had complete control again. However, that was not necessarily a good thing. He was suddenly very unbalanced, and his injuries, the fight's exhaustion, and his low chakra all kicked in full force. Naruto quickly created a clone using the remaining chakra, which caught him. After that, it took Sasuke by the other shoulder and started to return to the village. "If I just remain conscious, we should be able to survive until we hit other shinobi or return to the village." However, as they made their way across the treetops, it turned out to be easier said than done. As they approached Konoha, his will was put to the ultimate test due to the severity of the journey and all of his injuries. It was only after a few minutes of travel that Naruto's clone simply vanished. Naruto was dropped from the treetops mid-jump towards the ground, so this did little to help his health. He opened his eyes and saw a very familiar mask. Wearing shinobi before fainting. He had expected to feel the startling impact of his body hitting the ground, but instead he felt himself being caught by someone. Tsunade had heard that Naruto and Sasuke had been brought back, so she was running as quickly as she could to the hospital. As she hurried through the hospital, people were either hurrying to avoid her path or running alongside her to provide her with status updates on the retrieval members. There were just 2 people in Naruto's room when she barged in. A nurse was making sure Naruto was comfortable, and the other was conducting what appeared to be an examination. After completing his examination, the medical ninja turned to face the Hokage and asked, "Status report, how is he doing?" Tsunade nodded, clearly pleased that the fox was actually accomplishing something useful while inside. "Well, internally nothing is wrong, but from this scar," he said, pointing to the middle of his chest, "we can assume that he was hit with some sort of technique and then healed." Then, however, she saw a scar that appeared to have somewhat faded. "What is that?" Looking at the scar, it appeared as though Naruto had been bitten. "Honestly ma'am, we don't know, it's not from the fight that we do know. It seems he got that before all of this happened as the scar has healed a bit, though I doubt that it will permanently disappear." Even though there were creatures in the Forest of Death, she didn't think they could cause this much harm and leave a lasting scar. Fighting with a bloodline member? Perhaps at the Chunin exams? Neither explanation made sense, but it was irrelevant at the time. The doctor shrugged and asked, "Anything else major with Uzumaki?" "Other than a lot of bruises and a couple of burns, he should be fine with rest. Now however I believe that I will have to go help the other team with the Uchiha." This piqued her interest. "What condition is he in?" With a final look at Naruto, they left the room and entered Sasuke's room next door. "From what I've heard, ma'am, it isn't pretty, but I guess we'll both be able to see now." On the other hand, a whole team was in there trying to fix him, unlike Naruto's room. Tsunade managed to get a clear view of Sasuke's body by navigating through all of the nurses and medics. She went to work leading the way on his injuries, her eyes widening at the extent of the damage. Near the spot where Itachi had previously broken Sasuke's left arm, it was broken once more. His right arm was also broken and dislocated, and it was in the same general location. It appeared that a large force struck his right leg from the side, breaking it below the knee. But she was simultaneously concerned, perplexed, and a little afraid of his left leg. The way it was crushed worried her more than the fact that it was crushed. After all, she could tear someone to pieces if she so desired. His ankle had been crushed to the thickness of one of Jiraiya's books in an area roughly the size of her hand. She was also concerned about the scratches and claw marks all over his face. According to the report she had read, Naruto's initial use of the fox's energy and the fact that he had to use it against Sasuke may have contributed to his extensive damage. She started working on his leg, reasoning that if she could repair Rock Lee's arm and leg and restore his ability to walk, there was no reason why she couldn't do the same for Sasuke. She detested her Hippocratic oath at times. When Naruto realized he was in a hospital, his eyes opened and he tried to identify his location. This whiteness and that particular hospital odor were unique to Konoha. As Naruto slowly sat up, he experienced a sharp pain in his chest. Glancing down, he saw that Sasuke had bandaged the area where he had struck him with the Chidori. Despite the pain in his chest, Naruto slowly got up and threw his legs over the edge of the bed to stand up. "Speaking of Sasuke, I should go see how he's doing." Naruto, a little unsteady, started for the door, but was stopped by a color that caught his attention. He noticed that someone had left him something next to his bed when he turned to face it. Flowers? Naruto had previously visited the hospital a few times, and while his close friends were typically the only ones who paid him a visit, he had never received flowers. Naruto left the room with a gentle smile and continued down the corridor until he encountered a nurse. "Uzumaki, you should not be out of bed yet." The nurse sighed and pointed back where he had come from, saying, "I need to see the others, where are they?" Naruto approached Sasuke's room and got ready to open the door. "Sasuke is in the room next door to you, but I'm afraid you can't see the others since they are in different wings. You better get back to bed after you see him, you hear me?" Naruto opened the door slowly and peered in, saying, "Ya ya, I hear ya." Sakura was sitting next to Sasuke's bed, holding his hand and appearing concerned, while Sasuke was in bed with bandages all over his body. Naruto was more hurt than he anticipated, but he was always skilled at masking his true emotions, so he put on a front and entered slowly while still experiencing the Chidori's chest pain. Sakura turned and appeared astonished to see him. He disregarded the question, saying, "Naruto, what are you doing here? Shouldn't you be resting?" "How is Sasuke doing?" She seemed to lose all concern for him after hearing about him. Naruto simply shrugged and said, "Well, thanks to Tsunade-sama, he will be able to walk again." Even though he claimed not to care, he said, "That's good." Just glancing at Sakura brought back memories of Sasuke's words. She was now observing Sasuke like a devoted girlfriend, having long since stopped glancing at him. Naruto sighed and turned to open the door, but Sakura's voice interrupted him. Sakura then grinned at him and said, "Naruto, thank you. Thank you for bringing him home where he belongs." When she smiled, he would normally be thinking about how beautiful she was, but at the moment, he didn't want to look at her at all. With a simple sigh, he turned and walked out the door. "Yay, yay?" Sakura asked, perplexed as to why Naruto was upset, but he quickly went back to keeping watch over Sasuke. He entered his room next door and collapsed onto his bed, closing his eyes as his head struck the pillow. "Trouble with the ladies?" "Not exactly," is a shrugged response. Naruto glanced up in the direction of the voice and noticed the last person he had anticipated standing there. "Birdman?" After shifting his pillow so he could rest his back against it, Naruto said, "It is good to see you, Naruto, but I recommend you lay back down, for this conversation will take a bit." He then waited for Medivh to finish. Still unsure of how Medivh obtained his information, Naruto nodded and said, "It appears that your mission was successful. Yay, we managed to get Sasuke back, though I'm not sure what happened to the rest of the team yet." "And what of that conversation next door earlier?" Naruto lowered his head slightly and asked, "You heard that, did ya?" Naruto needed to discuss this with someone, and he believed Medivh was as good a person as any to say, "I must say I know quite more than you think. I said that I would bring Sasuke back, and I do, but I realized that she thinks more of him than me, even with him deserting the village." Medivh gave a nod. Naruto shrugged and said, "I assume you like this girl?" Naruto just sat there for a moment, recalling those simpler days, saying, "I used to. I thought she was pretty back in the academy. I thought that she was like me." Medivh nodded sympathetically at Naruto. "It's just when I realized that after all I have done for her she still likes him, even after what he tried to do. I just wanted him out of the picture altogether. Believe me, Naruto, there have been moments where even I have wanted to turn some people into toads and then squash them until they were nothing but mush." Naruto cracked up when he heard that. Not sure what to think of Sakura at this point, Naruto just sat there staring blankly into space. Women are one of the, if not the most, mysterious creatures that have been created. Many men before you have tried to understand them without success. Medivh chuckled softly and said, "So what are you doing here, Birdman? I'm guessing you didn't just come here to check up on me?" Naruto kept staring at Medivh, waiting for the true reason. What can't a master come see his apprentice after a mission accomplished? Naruto became a little more animated upon hearing that. "I'm actually here to give you a gift that may find you closer to your goal than you realize." "What do you mean? I believe you previously stated that your goal was to become the most formidable ninja in your village." "Yay. Well, with this gift it should make you much more powerful." Naruto would be jumping with delight if he weren't exhausted or suffering from emotional and physical wounds. "So, what is it?" Medivh merely gave a headshake. After receiving the hint, Naruto got up and went to Medivh. "Not here, boy. We have to go somewhere a bit more secluded." "How will we travel there? We probably won't be walking." Medivh simply extended his hand in response. Naruto grabbed his hand and said, "No, we are going to do a much faster and more inconspicuous way. Take my hand, Naruto." He felt the vertigo he had experienced when he teleported before they vanished in an instant. Jiraiya grinned as she peered through a spyglass at a couple of rooftops. Well, it seems we have finally seen this elusive Birdman." Naruto was a little dizzy when he dropped into the cave, but he was fine otherwise. Instead of being a simple domed room in the middle of a mountain, the room now had what appeared to be seals that extended from the center to the walls. Naruto was familiar with seals, like the ones you use to seal things in scrolls, but this was a whole new level. The room was filled with intricate arrangements of figures that were saying who knew what. "So, what exactly is this present?" Medivh began to move toward the middle of the room, and Naruto trailed behind. "Did you ever wonder how the Guardians could be so strong as to fight the threat of demons worldwide when I described what they were and what they did?" "A bit, but I wasn't really trying to understand at the time." A body known as the Council of Tricephal, which selected the Guardian, was the source of much of the Guardians' authority. Their already exponential power is increased to previously unheard of levels when they select a Guardian and empower them through a ritual. Despite the disadvantages, each council member who gave the Guardian authority lost some of their authority as a result. Naruto scratched the back of his head while he listened. It was not shocking to learn that Medivh's mother had served as a Guardian like him, but it was instructive. The last person to become Guardian was a woman by the name of Agwin, my mother. "So they nominated you as a Guardian after she finished serving as one?" Medivh laughed and shook his head. "No, they didn't, in fact. Then, how did you end up being the Guardian?" "My mother, determining that the current guardian should be the one to choose the next one, decided that I should be the guardian after her. What made her believe that? According to what I've read and heard, the council had become corrupt and had lost its mission. Although this did not bode well with the council most of the time, my mother chose to act as a proper guardian and not play a pawn in their game. Who was your father, then, if this Agwin was your mother? Medivh gave a headshake. That's a tale for another time, Naruto. Let's return to our topic for the moment. Naruto nodded, but he had one more question. However, didn't you mention that the ritual needed a number of other people to perform? Naruto's eyes widened as he quickly connected the dots. Yes, but that was when they were empowering the guardian. This would be more of a transfer, while not nearly as complex, still takes a while. So you want to? He was perplexed rather than thrilled at the idea of having much more power when he said, "Yes Naruto, I want to give you the power of the guardian." And here I thought you would be jumping for boy, my dear boy. I'm sorry, I am excited, I just have one question. What is Naruto doing there? Why? Even though this wasn't the question he was expecting, he nevertheless carried on the discussion. Why? Why grant me this authority? You mentioned that guardians roam your world and vanquish demons. How am I meant to accomplish that? Not even a demon has ever touched me. What are you expecting me to accomplish? Naruto's breathing had become labored. Medivh simply waited for Naruto to catch his breath while standing there composedly. Naruto was about to ask him another question when he said, "Naruto, I do not know what you are expected to do with this power." The statement, "I just want you to use this power for whatever purpose you see fit," left Naruto even more perplexed. Throughout your life you have been shunned and despised by those you wish to protect. You could have given in at any time, but no, you continued, persevered, got stronger. You always try to see the good in people, regardless of who you are speaking to or arguing with. There are creatures much older than you that have given in and turned into the very thing they fought against. You could have simply killed your teammate during the altercation, and your mission would have been accomplished. He was once more astounded by the information Medivh provided. But rather than killing him, you fulfilled your promise by bringing him back to life, albeit a little damaged. You offered your teammate a second chance. I have personally had that opportunity, which is not one that many people claim to have. You gave him the chance, but it is up to him whether he seizes it. When Naruto was informed that he was going to be given power beyond his wildest dreams, he was at a loss for words. You would willingly put yourself at risk just to save strangers you didn't know, which you already did by the way. So you are the ideal person to become guardian, and I would be honored if you accepted. What on earth am I meant to do? It did not help at all to think about it a little more. He could not for the life of him understand why Medivh had given him this. It wasn't like he could be the protector of Medivh's world. After all, he was a ninja and would have to go on missions. Screw it. Naruto chose to wing it and see what happened, disregarding all reason. Medivh got up from his bow and said, "Sigh, Medivh, I accept your gift." "Excellent my boy, you will not regret your decision. Now we should begin right away, this could take a while. Oh, and after this I am going to send you to Karazhan for another part of your gift." Naruto was thrilled to learn that. "What is it?" Naruto moved to the center of the room and stood there while Medivh assumed his position inside a circle drawn along with the seal on the ground. "Haha, patience, my boy, it will be there for a long while. Now, I need you to stand at the center of the room so we can begin." "Will this hurt?" Medivh asked, nodding. Medivh closed his eyes and gripped his staff with both hands as he chanted in a language Naruto couldn't understand, saying, "It will definitely feel unpleasant at first. Now let's begin." Then, suddenly, Medivh began to glow a brilliant golden color. However, this glow did not remain on him, rather, it began to radiate out of him along the seals on the floor until it filled the entire space. The glow then approached Naruto and started to ascend him in seemingly random lines across his body, but it was clear that they had a purpose. They continued to encircle his body until they reached his face, then his eyes and mouth. His body was now being invaded by alien energy. Naruto's current emotion could only be characterized as distinct. He was experiencing a wide range of emotions as he felt the energy continue its journey. He wasn't exactly in pain or feeling good. The ritual was proceeding smoothly, and the boy's body was embracing the power with ease. It seemed as though the boy was a vacuum, soaking up all of the energy that Medivh was providing him. The boy's body was now starting to feel the physical effects of the guardian's power, and this was where things became a little complicated due to the ritual. A sleeping fox awakens and looks out of its cage to discover a golden glow permeating its host's body and affecting it in a number of fascinating ways. The fox then expelled some of his energy from the seal and said, "Well, this is quite the opportunity now, isn't it?" Medivh, meanwhile, was still struggling a little to get the boy's body to adjust when he suddenly sensed a dark, evil energy coming from inside the boy. Why must the fox step in at this point? He felt what the fox was doing just as he was ready to counteract its energy. Is it assisting me? In actuality, the fox's energy not only made Medivh's power flow more easily through the boy's body, but it also improved certain physical aspects of the boy's body that Medivh had not. It is influencing the rest of the boy's body through this ritual. However, if I don't do anything, the backlash might kill us both. Medivh let the fox do its thing and carried on with the ritual, allowing the fox's chakra to continue entwining with his. With the fox's assistance, it was also moving much more quickly than it should have. It would only take an hour or so to complete, as opposed to several hours. I must do this correctly. A nurse was now cowering as a furious Hokage yelled at her, asking, "What do you mean you don't know where you went?" Still in shock, Tsunade sighed, waved her away, and returned to Naruto's room, searching for any sign of escape, but finding nothing. I told him that he should go back to his room after he visited Sasuke and he said he would, so I assumed that he did go back. Then she heard the voice of someone she didn't want to see right now, and she rubbed her forehead in frustration. "Hey Tsunade." "Ho." Jiraiya simply grinned and said, "I'm not in the mood. Jiraiya, Naruto's gone and he should be resting." "Oh, I wouldn't worry, he should be back soon." Tsunade glared at him. The topic was jokingly sidestepped by Jiraiya. "You know something, don't you?" Tsunade let out another sigh and conceded, "My bae." Jiraiya was about to leave after giving the victory sign when he felt a pulse. "Okay, we'll discuss it later over sake, but I've got to get back to the other members of the retrieval team anyway." He had no idea what it was, but it was unquestionably strong. He noticed that Tsunade was feeling it as well. He shook his head and asked, "Any ideas?" Tsunade was now gritting her teeth as she said, "Nothing, never felt anything like that before." Find Naruto and bring him back now. The effort of performing the ritual correctly was now causing Medivh to perspire. Almost done. Then, as the last of the glow left Medivh's body, it began to fade away until he was once more normal. His body was now glowing a reddish gold glow. Medivh was almost knocked off his feet by the sudden surge of energy as the glow intensified, but he managed to stay upright by using the rooting spell instinctively. Naruto was swaying a little following the explosion. He believed that a single word, powerful, adequately captured who he was. Naruto had never been an egomaniac. Well, perhaps he was, but that wasn't important. Naruto experimented with movement, moving slowly. To put it mildly, it was a novel feeling. He could sense his power in the air around him. It was as though he was filling the space with his energy, and it was still attempting to find its way out because there was so much of it. Before, it had been a ball the size of an apple, but now it was growing much larger, and all around him, tiny goblets of water began to form just out of water in the air and hover around the entire room. Naruto tried one of his techniques, waving his hand a little, and a crackle resounded in the air. Around him and Medivh, the water kept globulating until he let it go. He scratched the back of his head, still in disbelief, but he pulled away when he felt his nails dig into the flesh. He noticed that his fingernails were more like claws when he pulled his hand up. Sharp enough to cut through a lot if he tried, but not quite claw-like. He licked his lips and saw that his canines were a little longer as well, long enough to rival Kiba. Naruto was still in awe and all he could say was, "It seems that the ritual was a success, how do you feel?" "Whoa." Naruto appeared to be a child with a new toy. "Haha, it seems like you can feel the effects." Naruto was stopped when he said, "Though not all of them necessarily were by me." "What do you mean?" It was beginning to sound unsavory. "The fox within you has used my ritual to gain access to some parts of your body and adjust them." Medivh shook his head, saying, "He isn't going to take control somehow, is he?" He gestured to Naruto's navel, saying, "He shouldn't be able to as long as that seal remains intact. You've been able to access the demon's chakra before, haven't you?" Naruto nodded, recalling his previous battles. "Yeah, so the fox basically messed with my body like with the teeth and the nails?" Naruto was relieved that he couldn't be taken over, but he was still bothered by something. "I didn't say this was bad, but the power of the guardian doesn't affect the physical part of the body as much as the spiritual, magical side. The fox improved your body in many ways, physical strength, speed, and reflexes for example." "Why would the fox do this?" Naruto laughed as well, but he did remember that thought in case he ever came to mind again. "I'm not sure at the moment, Naruto. Maybe you should ask him, ha ha ha." Naruto recalled what Medivh had said earlier after the ritual was completed. Medivh tsked and said, "Oh, and what do I have to go back to Karazhan for?" Medivh held out his hand, and a portal materialized behind him. "I can't give away the surprise, can I?" All I can say is have Berthold take you to the top of the tower and he should know what is going on from there. Now here." Instead of saying anything, Medivh briefly pressed his hand against Naruto's head and asked, "Is there any way I can learn to do that?" After he took it away, Naruto felt more at ease in the library than he had previously. He knew where a number of books on various subjects, including the one he was interested in, were located. Naruto gave Bird.Man a spontaneous hug and said, "Thanks Bird.Man. For everything." Medivh, feeling a little uneasy, simply gave the boy a gentle pat on the back. After that, Naruto left the embrace and entered the portal. Now that he was back in Karazhan, Naruto was at the entrance. He walked forward and waited for Berthold to appear. "Ah, young one, so good to see you again, so what are you here for this time?" Medivh said that he was going to give me a gift. The first part he did, but he said I need to come here for the next part. Naruto shrugged. "What is this next part?" Berthold's eyes widened slightly before appearing hopeful as he said, "I am not sure. Oh yeah, Bird.Man told me to tell you to take me to the top of the tower." Naruto was somewhat surprised when he asked, "Are you sure that's exactly what he said, boy?" Berthold began to move through the opening and up into the tower without saying anything more than, yay why?" Naruto had no choice but to follow him. They continued to ascend until Berthold held the final door open, allowing Naruto to enter. In comparison to the rest of the tower, Karazhan's very top was just a stone platform that circled outward to the edge. "So what are we doing here?" "Here, young master, is where we begin the final ritual." "What final ritual?" Naruto nodded and asked, "The master gave you his power, did he not?" He pointed to a rock sitting on the floor and said, "Now this is another gift he is giving you." "He's giving me a rock?" For some strange reason, Berthold almost felt the need to face Vault. "What is under the rock, young master?" "Well, the floor and the rest." "Wait." Naruto suddenly realized what was happening. "He's giving me his home." "Yes, young one, this is the final step, though this will also be goodbye." "Okay. Wait, what?" Even though Naruto and Berthold weren't particularly close, Naruto still considered him a friend. "Yes, goodbye. As soon as you take ownership of Karazhan I shall disappear." Berthold laughed at the boy and asked, "Isn't there a way for you to stay?" "Did I say I want to stay any longer?" "Well, no, but you assumed that me being a ghost I would want to be alive forever, however I do not want that." "Why?" Berthold sighed. "Well, young master, I am tired. Being a ghost is not all it is cracked up to be. Do you know the reason I am ghost in the first place?" Naruto was shaking his head. "Well, it was because of the master actually." "Wait, Bird.Man did this to you?" "No, young master. Well, not intentionally. Me being a ghost and the state of Deadwind Pass are due to the death of my master." Naruto gave a nod and then stopped. Berthold waved it away, however, saying, "Birdman has died? He'll probably tell you the tale sooner or later, but now back on topic. My master was one of, if not the most powerful of mortals to ever wield magic, due to a many number of reasons which he no doubt explained to you. The death of the master left a curse on this valley. Surely you've seen how gloomy and grim this valley looks. Looking over the edge it appeared to be deathly and jagged. However, this is about to change. With what's about to happen it will become something much different." Berthold merely smirked and asked, "What do you mean?" "I can't tell you something even I don't know now, can I? All the master told me was when he told me it was time was to bring you up here and to tell you to stand in the center, then events would move from there and I would finally be able to rest." Naruto tensed up and moved to the middle of the top, waiting for something to happen. 1 second, then 5, then 10, and still nothing. The center platform of the tower sank an inch into the roof, interrupting him as he said, "Hey Berthold, I think." His body began to feel as though it was being drained of energy as he looked down to see what had happened. Attempting to move or stop his energy from leaving proved futile because a barrier appeared and held him there. It appeared to be exhausting him to the point where his body began to feel the effects as he grew weaker and weaker. Damn it. Move. Despite his best efforts, Naruto was unable to make any progress. It appeared as though he would lose consciousness, but it abruptly stopped. Naruto was about to attempt to break through the barrier after getting back on his feet when he felt himself lifted into the air and let go of his remaining energy. What transpired next could be characterized as breath-taking, but that still did not do it justice. A dark blue beam of energy blasted into the sky from the summit of the tower. A ray of sunlight managed to break through the clouds and light up the top of the tower, shooting through them and hurtling higher into the sky. A strong pulse of energy rift suddenly swept through the world of Azeroth, affecting different magic users. For a few more seconds, the pillar kept shooting until the top tower's base began to build up. Suddenly, the energy ball at the top of the tower trembled for a moment before exploding outward. However, This explosion kept growing and engulfing the tower, in contrast to a typical explosion that would explode within a certain distance and stop. It appeared to flow across the valley as it grew, acting as a purifying flame that was purifying the earth and the air of some sort of impurity. The energy also grew higher in the sky, where it started to burn away the clouds that had previously obscured Deadwind Pass. The sun was shining in Deadwind Pass for the first time in a long time. Naruto moaned as he tried to go back to sleep, but the foolish sun was keeping him up. Hold on a second, the sun? Naruto opened his eyes, but the intense light nearly blinded him, so he had to close them almost instantly. Naruto was able to open his eyes and partially block out the sun by raising his hand. He looked around the top of the tower to see if Berthold was still there, but then he remembered what Berthold had said. Hey Berthold, what hap? However, no matter how hard he squinted, he was unable to locate him. It looks like he wasn't kidding. Well, rest in peace anyway, my friend. Naruto noticed that there were no clouds in the sky, which was a stunning shade of blue. As Naruto stood up, he looked out over the canyon and saw that all of the dead trees and shrubbery he had previously seen had vanished. Everything appeared to have been completely destroyed. Naruto noticed that all of the ogres were glancing around them and occasionally pointing at something different than before as he took a closer look around the pass. But like him, the majority of them had their eyes covered in an attempt to block out the sun. One of the ogres yelled and pointed at him as he was about to take another look around. It's Da Boss, Naruto exclaimed, realizing that Gurunk was the one who had yelled. He shouted that he was now making his way to the tower's entrance by pushing his way through the throng of ogres. When Naruto saw him heading for the entrance, he proceeded through the tower in that direction, pausing as he passed the library. Using the appropriate hand sign, Naruto said, might as well learn something while I'm here. He had intended to create nearly 100 clones and send them in, with half of them studying the books and the other half practicing the techniques. Naruto was confused for a minute before he smiled, sent them in any case, and moved toward the entrance after his 100 clones transformed into many times that number. Naruto couldn't help but notice that something was different as he made his way through the tower. Well, more sensing than actual notice. There had previously been a sort of gloomy aura surrounding the tower when he was inside. However, he thought the tower was much livelier this time around as he passed through. Everything appeared friendlier than before and seemed to have a brighter glow. Naruto accelerated until he finally arrived at the door after beginning to hear a pounding sound coming from it. Naruto had to take a slight detour to open it because the large fist almost struck him in the head. Oh sorry, boss. Naruto smiled nervously while carefully scratching the back of his head. Gurunk said, no problem, Gurunk. He then gestured toward the sky. Naruto came up with an explanation for the question, hey boss, what happened to Da Sky? How to explain this? Well, to be honest Gurunk, I'm not sure why the sky is clear now. I know it has to do with magic though. Oh. Gurunk simply appeared to accept it at face value because, in his opinion, it had little bearing on their day-to-day activities. After a moment of confusion, Naruto asked, boss, why are you wearing that? And looked down to see that he was still wearing his previous hospital gown. Naruto attempted to shift the conversation by saying, no reason, so anything happened while I was gone? Gurunk appeared to be grinning, and Naruto didn't know if that was a good thing, but he simply nodded and smiled. Not really boss, a few tried to become Da Boss but I beat them good for ya. Gurunk shook his head, that's good, Gurunk, so do you guys need anything? Naruto knew that would be an issue later, but he didn't see a way to resolve it at the moment. Not really boss, we are doing fine right now, but some of Da boys are itching for a fight. Gurunk simply stood there and stared at Naruto, nodding, if I find a fight you will be the first to know. Naruto broke the ice because he quickly became bored. Is there anything else Gurunk? As Naruto made his way back to the camp, he noticed that Gurunk was telling the other ogres what had happened and that they were all yelling, oh, before returning to their usual activities. Not right now boss, see y'all later. As he left, Naruto made the decision to take a quick look around before waiting for the portal to reopen. Naruto observed that, in contrast to earlier, there was now vegetation surrounding the tower as he strolled around it and the old town that surrounded it. Not exactly plant life, like a tree, bush, or flower, but rather grass. As he approached the tower's side, he noticed that no matter how far he went, there was a ring of grass surrounding the structure. He put his hand down and rubbed the grass while kneeling next to the tower's wall. He was surprised at how soft it was, but as he did so, something happened. The grass appeared to grow even more where his hand had been after he rubbed it and attempted to pull it off. Naruto looked at his hand intently and then back at the ground, which surprised me. He placed his hand slowly on an area of the ground that had not been impacted by the grass growth and left it there for a while. Naruto slowly withdrew his hand and noticed a tiny patch of grass that was only half an inch high and not even the size of his finger. Naruto tried something new and was surprised once more. After placing his hand in the dirt, Naruto pushed chakra through it and into the ground. After a brief moment of waiting, Naruto held his hand and abruptly removed it. The grass grew in a large circle, about 3 feet in diameter, around him as he worked. His mind began to spin as he stood up and looked at his work, and he grinned as he considered the potential outcomes. Before he could continue to think, he had a sudden epiphany when he realized that the portal was now open and waiting after one of his clones vanished. Naruto walked back to the entrance, took one last look around, then walked through the door, shut it, and entered the tower. Naruto saw the portal not far in and proceeded toward it, pausing only for a few seconds to inhale deeply. Naruto experienced dizziness as he entered the portal, and then he found himself back in the mountain room with Medivh. Medivh simply stood there grinning, as he always did, stoically. As he asked, his smile never left his face, "So my boy, how do you like your present?" Both Medivh and Naruto laughed when Medivh said, "Well, I can safely say it beats my current home by a lot." Suddenly, Medivh's expression changed to one of contemplation. "Oh Naruto, I've been meaning to ask you, you had the examination before all this ruckus happened, correct?" "Yay, what about it?" Naruto was going to respond, "Did you pass this examination?" when he became aware of something. "I don't know." Naruto was never informed if he was a Chunin. Medivh gave him confidence, and Naruto grinned and said, "Well, I'm sure that you passed and got promoted, my dear boy." "What the hell do you mean I'm not a Chunin?" Naruto then found himself roped up in the center of the Hokage's office. "I was not here for the exam, and the group of individuals deciding who was Chunin material did not choose you. The only one they chose to be Chunin was Shikamaru Nara." Naruto was still having none of it. Why did Shikamaru turn into a Chunin then? Tell me. Tsunade was growing weary of his arguments quickly. "Naru. But I brought Sasuke back, we even took down a team of Jonin." "Naruto," he exclaimed, but instead of turning away, he looked directly into her eyes with defiance. Tsunade stared at him, trying to understand what had happened to him. She could sense that something was different even if they weren't in the same room. Naruto had previously produced an enormous amount of chakra, to put it mildly, but now it was incomparable. When Shizune brought him in tied up, the amount of chakra he was unconsciously leaking was enough to almost overwhelm her. In addition to his now monstrous chakra, he had undergone physical transformation. She hadn't noticed it at first because it was so subtle, but after staring at him for a long time, she realized that his whiskers had darkened from before. His canines were longer than most people's, but they were still long enough to give him the appearance of a dog or a fox. She was afraid of that thought. Now that Naruto was certain she was suspicious, she said, "It was decided that you were not to be a Chunin, that's the end of the story. Now tell me where you were." But he was prepared with an excuse. "I was hungry and this hospital food doesn't cut it, so I went to get some ramen." When Naruto discovered he had been unconscious for longer than he had anticipated, he twitched and asked, "For 3 hours. I like to enjoy my ramen as I eat it." Tsunade thought he was still not telling them anything, even though his logic made sense from his point of view. This piqued his interest. "Well, now that you're here, I might as well tell you the fate of Team 7. With Sasuke abandoning the village willingly, we are going to have to incarcerate him until we can have him interrogated, and with that curse seal on him." Naruto was able to put it together from there. Tsunade sighed and went on, "So what's going to happen with the rest of Team 7? "Well, I have decided for now you and Sakura will remain together and do D-rank missions until I see it fit that you can do any higher ranked ones." "What about Kakashi? Sensei? You two should be able to handle D-ranked missions, so I'm keeping Kakashi on higher ranked missions until the situation becomes a bit more stable." Naruto was extremely saddened by this. In addition to the fact that he had to spend time with Sakura alone, he was not looking forward to performing grunt work again after completing those D-ranked missions some time ago. He didn't think he had much of a chance with Sakura now that Sasuke was back, even if he was in jail. "Aw come on granny, can't we do some C-ranked at least?" Naruto, accustomed to her threats, sighed and tried to wriggle his hand around, but his fingernail caught the rope and sliced right through it. "I said no, now you better get back to that hospital bed now or I'll give you another reason to be there," he said. Naruto was a little startled and attempted to sever the remaining rope that was holding him. He wasn't sure what to anticipate, but he was pleasantly surprised when his nail felt like butter passing through the rope. Naruto was able to gather the remaining rope, stand up, and begin to leave by continuing upward. In the meantime, Tsunade questioned how he accomplished that without holding a kunai. Yay granny, just come get me when you got a real mission for me. As Naruto left her office, she said, report here tomorrow morning at 10 for your mission. In order to comply, he went back to the hospital. With a distressed expression on his face, Jiraiya pulled himself through the window and said, Jiraiya, you can come in now. Tsunade nodded at his presumption, he's lying. Jiraiya nodded and said, yay, and I'm assuming you have an idea why? Jiraiya smiled as Tsunade nodded and sighed, not exactly, but I've something to tell you. You know the deal, right? Yay, just let me finish up these last bits of paperwork and we'll head off. After returning to his room at last, Naruto was about to fall asleep when his head struck the pillow and he had a thought. Naruto squinted his eyes in agony, feeling as though a tidal wave was crashing into his head. Naruto was holding his head with both hands and trying his hardest to push through, but it hurt like hell. Naruto was so exhausted that he wondered what the devil had happened when he suddenly realized that he had learned some new techniques and knowledge. It stopped abruptly when he felt like he could handle no more. He was immediately drawn to one of the methods. Naruto extended his hand, drew on his newly acquired knowledge, and concentrated hard. He uttered a few words slowly after clearing his head. But these were no ordinary words, they were infused with both literal and symbolic power. Naruto pronounced the final syllable while releasing a powerful burst of chakra, visualizing what he wanted to happen and focusing his chakra on the middle of his hand. Naruto now noticed a luminous bluish-white energy in his palm. With a burst of chakra, the energy expanded outward as Naruto thrust his palm out, condensing the energy into a condensed ball. About a foot of ice formed on the wall in front of his bed as the energy spread out like a fierce wind. Naruto was unsure of what to think as he looked at the wall, then his hand, and finally the wall again. Only Haku's former clan, who were all now deceased, were rumored to possess the ability to control ice. He dredged up even more information since he had read in a book that certain spells in Azeroth needed specific words to be spoken in order to properly shape your energy and make the spell work. He sensed a potential connection between this and the way ninjas shape their energy with hand signs. He was startled out of his reverie when he realized that his room now had an ice wall. Thinking of a way to clean up all of that frozen water, he thought, oh boy, they won't be happy to see that. Water that's frozen. As he moved the water as before, Naruto hurriedly attempted to move the ice in his imagination. But it did not go as planned because of his actions, which caused a sheet of ice to break off from the wall and begin floating in midair. Naruto started tinkering with its shape as if it were an ice sculpture, trying to figure out how to transform it back into water. It simply turned into a large ice ball as he continued to compress it. Recalling that he needed to suppress his emotions below his normal level in order for the ice to remain ice, Naruto attempted the exact opposite. The ice abruptly turned to water as he thought of his typical, happier thoughts. Naruto turned the remaining ice in his room into water and floated in the direction of the globe he now held, grinning. Naruto chose to play around a little, making the water coil around the room like a snake. Naruto knew that it only appeared to be a long glob of water flowing through the air, despite his belief that it moved like a serpent. He made the decision to try and give it shape, trying to make it resemble a real snake. This was more difficult than he had anticipated, though, because when he tried to make a snake appear in his mind using water, it only slightly changed shape. He made the decision to give up for the night because he was exhausted. He let his head rest against the back of his pillow and dozed off after releasing the water into the air. We're finally here. As she sat in the booth, she took a large swig of sake, which made her nerves really jangle. Tsunade and Jiraiya would frequently go out for drinks when either A. Tsunade needed someone to talk to after having a difficult day. Or B. She needed to speak with Jiraiya about something that was crucial even though it didn't directly affect the village. Jiraiya made the decision to initiate the conversation. After taking a swig for himself, he put the bottle down in the center and said, I'm not sure what you're gonna do with the Uchiha honestly. With that curse seal still on him, I'm not sure he's going to be able to be a ninja without us constantly worrying of him betraying the village. Jiraiya shook his head and had a look that suggested he had already considered that option. Can't you just take the seal off him? He asked. Tsunade took another swig and simply gazed at the bottle. If only it were that easy. With what Orochimaru did to the seal, it's even more integrated into his body now, so if I try to remove the seal and I fail, it will kill him. Jiraiya and Tsunade shook their heads at the implications of the situation, saying, I just don't know. With him being the last member of the Uchiha clan, Kaharu, Homura, and the rest of the council are still arguing on what should be done. Whether to keep him imprisoned forever, death, or even given to Danzo for rehabilitation. Given the root members' fervent devotion to their leader, it was impossible to predict what Danzo would do to Sasuke. Jiraiya shook his head once more and said, could we bring in someone from another village? Maybe someone knows something you don't. I've already thought of that and looked up a couple of people. The problem is unless we had information on the mark from Orochimaru himself we won't know nearly as much as we could. I'll bring them in anyway, but don't get your hopes up. Tsunade wasn't pleased with that information. It's hopeless then, isn't it? We're gonna keep him imprisoned for the rest of his life unless we agree to kill him. Tsunade drained the bottle and exhaled deeply in relief, saying, I do have a thought, but I'm gonna go through my other contacts before I resort to it. Jiraiya waved for another bottle of sake and then returned to her thoughts, asking, what the hell are you talking about? Tsunade took another swig and turned back to Jiraiya, saying, well, from what I understand, there may be a way the fire temple can help us. Tsunade was now swirling the contents of the bottle in her hand as Jiraiya went on, saying, just do it. After you exhaust your other sources, go to the fire temple. And for Kami's sake please hurry, or else the council is going to be the end of me. Tsunade and Jiraiya had discussed it for a long time after the encounter with Orochimaru and had concluded that Naruto was being taught by someone else. However, they had no real reason to pursue it at this time because they had little tangible proof, much less a face they could rely on. Oh, and you know how I believe Naruto has been getting some other training. Jiraiya took the bottle out of her hand and poured more for himself, asking, what about it? You learn anything new? Well, I have finally managed to get a look at the guy. She sat up a little, clearly intrigued. And Tsunade started popping her knuckles and said, well, let's just say I don't think that he is a local. He quickly covered his face and braced himself for a punch, but she snatched the bottle back and took another swig. What I'm saying is that I'm going to go to Inoichi for some help in getting a picture and bring it to you tomorrow, he said. Jiraiya sighed and leaned back in his chair, gesturing to the bartender for another bottle, saying, you better for your sake. Naruto awoke, rubbed his eyes, sat up, stretched, and got ready for the day until he recalled the events of the previous evening. Even in Azeroth, clones were able to relay information to him. His eyes widened as he prepared to go to Medivh and request that he create a portal, but then he recalled Tsunade's words. He felt much better than the day before and was eager to leave his bed, saying, might as well, officially, check out once in my lifetime. In the hopes of finding someone to check him out of the hospital, Naruto left his room and made his way to one of the checkpoints that connect the various parts of the hospital. He was almost at the end of the hall when a familiar face appeared around the bend. Shikamaru! Exclaimed Genius, who heard his name and looked up to see Naruto standing in front of him in a hospital gown. He grinned despite his sigh. Naruto and Shikamaru laughed together and said, should have known you would try to get out of the hospital as soon as possible. Before Shikamaru could speak, both of them began moving in the same direction as Naruto as the laughter stopped. His tone caused Naruto to raise an eyebrow. So, we actually succeeded, huh? With a casual shrug, Shikamaru asked, you thought we wouldn't? Naruto recalled that he was unaware of the true condition of his teammates, so hearing him say, honestly, 5 genin out to retrieve a traitor from an unknown amount of enemy forces, which turned out to be 5 jonins, I'm surprised we all managed to make it back alive. So how are the others? Choji and Neji both got the worst of the injuries while Lee and Kiba are fine, though Akamaru is also being treated quite a bit from what I hear. Shikamaru held up his right hand and noticed a bandage around his index finger, saying, I'm surprised you don't seem to have any injuries. Since they were comparing scars, Naruto smirked and unbuttoned his top before revealing the scar on his chest to Shikamaru. Not quite if I say so. What about you? You seem to be doing alright. In fact, Shikamaru's eyes grew wide as he examined his scar. Naruto put his top back on and asked, what did he do to you? When Shikamaru recalled the Chunin exams, he saw Sasuke's technique pierce Gaara's final defense. He hit me with Chidori. Shikamaru shuddered. Naruto grinned and said, I'm surprised that left you in one piece. Shikamaru smiled as he laughed at his own joke. Well, I'm the most unpredictable ninja for a reason, aren't I? Naruto then remembered after noticing his coat. Shikamaru sighed as he realized Naruto had returned to his former self. Oh yay, how come you were made Chunin and I wasn't? You gave up on your match while I won mine. I don't know, Naruto, you'd be better off asking them. Shikamaru simply muttered a troublesome as they arrived at a desk. Well, Genin, Chunin, Jonin, or Hokage, regardless of what title I have, I'm still going to be the strongest ninja in the village. Shikamaru turned and walked towards another area of the hospital, waving goodbye languidly over his shoulder. Well, I was gonna come see you anyway, so that saved me a walk to your side of the hospital. Since you're doing okay, I'm going to go check back up on Neji and Choji. Naruto sighed and signed the final form as he hurriedly checked out of the hospital. He then put his arms over his head and popped them, smiling. The counter clerk shook his head, finally out of the hospital. Say, do you guys have my clothes? Naruto sighed, shook his head, and began to leave the hospital. When you were brought in, your clothes were basically gone and so the rest were taken off so they could make you more comfortable. As he left the hospital, Naruto said, "Oh well, I'll just stop by my apartment, thank you." He chose to walk to his apartment because, among other reasons, it wasn't that far away. Additionally, he felt the need to simply stroll rather than rush to get somewhere. For some reason, Naruto felt even better after pushing open the doors and inhaling deeply of the morning air outside. There's nothing like the fresh morning air to get you up and moving. Naruto started walking home with his hands by his sides because he didn't have any pockets. He noticed that most of the civilians were staring at him, and even though he was only wearing a hospital gown at the moment, that didn't stop him from narrowing his eyes. He went past people who usually treated him the same way a family would treat a hated in-law. They would not like him but wouldn't say it aloud, or the one family member with the courage would openly quarrel or argue with him. This time, though, they appeared to be unsure of how to evaluate him. Naruto had, in the past, dealt with unruly parents and children who had made his upbringing difficult, but aside from a few instances, the majority of those cases had not progressed beyond glances or a few sarcastic remarks. As he passed a mother and her son, she appeared to rush past him, tightening her grip on her son's arm as though she was worried he would hurt him. After wanting people to recognize his strength for so long, they finally realized that his power was a force to be reckoned with. However, as is true of humanity, people fear the unknown, which is essentially what Naruto was. So few people actually knew him personally, and the few that did were either ninjas or Tsuchi and Ayame. This confused Naruto, but it also upset him a little because he wanted these people's respect, not their fear. When he finally arrived at his apartment complex, Naruto took the stairs to his apartment and attempted to open the door but discovered it was locked. Sighing, remembering where his clothes were, he jumped over the rail preventing him from going over and hopped through his window, opening his closet, pulling another jumpsuit, throwing it on, and walking back out the door heading out to the Hokage's office. Naruto was certain that he was now able to keep the clones going even while through the portal. He ran across rooftops and toward the village gates, saying, "Since I'm going to be doing D-ranked missions for a while, I might as well get training done while I'm doing it." However, 2 gate guards appeared just as he was landing and ready to leave the gates. He was shocked to hear, "Uzumaki, you're not allowed outside the village for the time being." No one had previously stopped him when he went outside. "What do you mean I can't go out?" He was about to give up and simply head back towards the tower when he noticed what appeared to be a family strolling outside the gates while the guards ignored them. "We've been ordered to not let you go outside the village for the time being." After glancing in that direction, the guard shrugged and asked, "What about them? How come they can go outside?" The man's tone of voice was that of a haughty jackass, which irritated him enough at the time to make him think that it was worth getting into trouble for. "We were only ordered to keep you in the village Uzumaki, so I recommend you turn around and go back inside." Naruto made the decision to continue his training by putting something he had previously learned to the test, but had not yet fully developed. "Hey guys, what's that?" he said, gesturing to the side of the village. Both guards glanced over, trying to see what he was pointing at, but they were unable to see it because they were squinting. When the Chunin turned back to face Naruto, he noticed that he had vanished. "Hey, what were you?" Naruto, meanwhile, had already left the gates and was en route to the cave that Medivh had taken over. The two of them were unaware that Naruto had just subtly manipulated them. He had tapped into those 2 guards' minds and gently persuaded them to look at where he was pointing for longer than they would normally, much like he had done when he was training to try to get that bug to do something he wanted. Even with humans, this type of brain manipulation was relatively easy to perform because it was not the most profound aspect of this type of magic. As he leapt through the trees, he was content with it for the moment, even though it wasn't nearly as manipulative as he had hoped. He followed the pulse as he had every time before, but each time he went there, he noticed that it seemed to be weakening. But since he was almost done learning the route to the cave, that wasn't an issue. Naruto entered the cave, passed through the illusion that guarded the entrance, approached the back wall, placed his hand against it, and watched as the cave burst open. As before, Medivh was standing in the center of the room, apparently waiting for him to arrive. "Don't you get bored out here, bird-man? I mean, it's not like there is much to do in here. You'd be surprised at how much I get around, dear boy. I also find that a more humble lifestyle makes you appreciate the smaller things in life that much more." "Yeah, little things okay." Naruto almost burst out laughing as he considered the location of Medivh's former residence. "So what, may I ask, dear boy, are you doing here? Shouldn't you be doing something for your village?" Medivh raised an interested eyebrow and said, "Well, I am, but before I do, I'm going to get some training done while I do so." Naruto then explained his plan to visit the cave daily and send numerous clones to Karazhan for training, while Tsunade had him complete D-ranked missions. "What did you have in mind, dear child?" he asked. In this manner, he would continue to grow stronger while also keeping her happy. Naruto considered it and recalled that he had completed a couple hundred the day before yesterday. It seems like a well thought out plan, Naruto. So how many are you going to send to Karazhan? He asked himself. Medivh nodded and extended his hand to open a portal, saying, I'll probably send a couple hundred at least.
That's it for today. I hope you guys enjoyed this great story. See you in the next one.